Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brayla Stone. Brayla Stone, a 17-year-old girl born and raised in North Little Rock, Arkansas, stands out for her fun-loving and outgoing personality. She lives in the suburb of Sherwood. Brayla is very active on social media, especially Instagram, where she attracts many followers thanks to her unique sense of humor. Despite being transgender and sometimes facing negative reactions from some people in the community, Brayla is always proud of who she is. She is not afraid to stand up for herself and oppose negative words or actions directed at her or her lifestyle. Brayla lives confidently and strongly, not letting anything stand in her way. Brayla naturally expresses her femininity in her daily life and on social media. This is shown not only through her style of dress and makeup but also through her behavior and communication with people. She realizes that true confidence comes from accepting and loving yourself, not from trying to meet other people's expectations. Despite life's challenges, Brayla persists in pursuing her dreams and holding on to her beliefs. She hopes to one day stand in a spotlight, proudly showing her true self to the world. Brayla is a strong and admirable girl. We use the pronoun she when talking about Brayla to show respect and acknowledge her gender identity. In 2020, Brayla began a relationship with Trevone Hayes Miller, an 18-year-old who worked at a local Arby's. However, Trevone has a troubled past. Trevone was involved in a murder when he was 14 and was part of a criminal gang. In April 2016, Trevone and two older teens plotted to rob Brian Thompson, a 17-year-old marijuana dealer. They lured Brian to the parking lot of a local recreation center, promising to buy his merchandise. Trevone was carrying a BB gun, while one of his friends was carrying a real gun. While Brian was making the transaction, the older teen suddenly shot Brian in the neck and stole $15. The group then fled. Brian's death highlights the brutality and guilt of Trevone and his gang's actions. It is clear that Trevone was a dangerous criminal. This raises the question of why Brayla would choose to date someone like that. It is possible that Brayla did not know about Trevone's criminal past, or that there were other factors in their relationship that we do not know about. Everyone has their own preferences and choices, and sometimes relationships do not follow conventional standards. However, not all young women are attracted to men with complicated pasts. Each woman has her own criteria when choosing a partner. Some may be attracted by empathy or hope that the other person will change for the better, while others may seek stability and security in the relationship. Police found about a pound of marijuana in the car and arrested all three suspects within a day of the shooting. Security cameras near the scene captured their images, leading to their quick arrest. Trevone, the youngest of the group, was initially charged with murder. However, he agreed to cooperate with the investigation and was prepared to testify against his co-defendants. This resulted in his charges being reduced to armed robbery in juvenile court. Although Trevone did not have to testify because his co-defendants pleaded guilty, he was prepared to disclose text messages in court. These messages showed that Trevone was the mastermind behind the robbery plan, despite being the youngest of the group. Trevone initially planned to commit the robbery at an abandoned house they had been using as a hideout. As a result, Trevone only served a short time in juvenile detention. Two older accomplices were convicted and remain in custody. In 2019, Trevone was arrested again for robbery and impersonation. He posed as a security guard at a Walmart and attempted to rob two customers in the parking lot. A few months later, he was arrested again on weapons charges. In 2020, Trevone and Brayla had a romantic and sexual relationship for a while. Brayla was a confident transgender person but still faced social stigma. She understood that not everyone accepted her. When she began her relationship with Trevone, Brayla agreed to keep it a secret. Although Trevone knew Brayla was transgender, he still felt uncomfortable making the relationship public. He feared the negative reaction from society and the possible consequences. Instead of public his relationship with Brayla, Trevone kept the relationship a secret. Their conflict escalated when Brayla discovered that Trevone was having an affair with another woman. Feeling betrayed, Brayla threatened to expose their relationship. Trevone responded by inviting Brayla to his home and offering to pay her to keep quiet. Trevone's fear causes him to have negative thoughts. Instead of facing society and taking responsibility, he wants to eliminate Brayla to keep the secret. Trevone tells her about his intentions through a phone call. However, she does not take the threat seriously, believing that Trevone only says it when he is agitated. She tries to calm him down and hopes that things will work out on their own. After the phone call, Brayla went to Trevone's home. A friend confirmed this while talking to Brayla on the phone as she was waiting for Trevone to open the door. About 5 hours after meeting Trevone, Brayla texted the friend, saying she was unhappy and they had been arguing for hours. Sadly, this was one of the last times anyone heard from Brayla. The next morning, a passerby called the police to report a body in a park in the Sherwood area of North Little Rock. Police found Brayla's body in a black Saturn Vue on a gravel road near 7224 Vista Point Court, which overlooks Gap Creek Drive. North Little Rock police had reported Brayla missing shortly before the discovery. When police arrived on the scene, they found the body of Brayla, a 17-year-old girl, in an abandoned car on a gravel road. She had been shot to death, with a gunshot wound to the head. Brayla's body was found lying face up on the floor in front of the passenger seat, with her legs extended behind the seat. The driver's side window was broken. The police report noted that there was blood inside the car and a strong smell of bleach. Investigators also found some of the interior upholstery discolored, possibly from exposure to bleach. News of Brayla's death has been widely reported in the media. Notably, her family requested that articles about Brayla use the pronoun he and her birth name, contrary to her expressed preferences prior to her death. It was clear that there was a clear disagreement between Brayla and her family about her identity. This was demonstrated by their lack of respect for her gender identity, even after her death. In the obituary, the family used an old image of Brayla before her transition, which caused a sense of disappointment and regret. Instead of celebrating Brayla for who she was, the family chose to present a past image that she had tried to change. This reflects the difficulties in society in accepting and respecting diversity in gender identity. After Brayla passed away, an Instagram account named Tap and Season commented that they killed her for $5,000 and posted pictures of money as evidence. In the next 24 hours, this account received a lot of criticism. Finally, the account owner admitted that he was just a 15-year-old kid making up stories to get attention. This thoughtless action is not only irresponsible but also deserves strong condemnation. The baseless confession of murder has caused more grief for Brayla's family and friends and affected the whole community. Anxiety and insecurity in the community are increasing as people read the comments and wonder if there is a real killer on the loose in Sherwood. The fact that the police have not arrested the imposter has only made the situation more tense. While this child may not face legal consequences, his actions have had serious repercussions. Hopefully, as he grows up, he will realize his mistakes and learn a valuable lesson about the importance of honesty and respect for others. After a week of investigation, the police arrested Trevone. According to reports, Trevone quickly became the prime suspect in the case. A friend of Brayla provided important information to the police. Brayla was with Trevone on the night of her murder, and the location where Brayla's body was found was a place Trevone frequently went to have sex, due to its proximity to his residence in Sherwood. After Brayla's death, Trevone's manager at Arby's contacted him. During the conversation, Trevone appeared very upset and said that he had screwed everything up and would not be returning to work for a long time. Although the manager tried to ask Trevone what had happened, he only replied that she would know soon. Upon hearing that Brayla's body had been discovered, the manager immediately reported the conversation to the police. With this information and other evidence, Trevone was finally arrested on August 3rd. At trial, prosecutors alleged that Trevone had murdered Brayla to prevent her from revealing their sexual relationship. According to the indictment, Brayla had discovered that Trevone was dating another woman and planned to retaliate by making their previous intimate relationship public. Fearing that he would be labeled a homosexual, Trevone allegedly paid Brayla to keep the matter quiet. However, when he learned that Brayla was still planning to reveal the information, Trevone killed her. At the time of the murder, Trevone, who was 19 years old, was charged with murder. He called his manager at Arby's to express his remorse for his actions. "I'm in big trouble and I could be dead," Trevone said. "I screwed up and I won't be able to come back for a long time." Trevone initially faced a murder charge that could have carried a life sentence or the death penalty. However, he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence through a deal with prosecutors. The investigation found similarities between Brayla's murder and that of 17-year-old Brian Allen Thompson. Brian was murdered in April 2016 in the parking lot of the Bill Harmon Recreation Center in Sherwood. A center employee discovered Brian dead behind the wheel, having been shot in the neck. Trevone is one of 3 teens charged with his murder. Sherwood Detective Craig Grisham noted that in both cases, the killer fired from the passenger seat, making it difficult for the victim in the driver's seat to escape. Craig also mentioned in his arrest affidavit that both murders occurred at locations Trevone was familiar with, close to his home and convenient for him to escape undetected. While Trevone did not kill Brian, he witnessed the crime from the back seat of the victim's car, according to his testimony to investigators. A Pulaski County court has convicted Trevone Hayes Miller, 20, of the murder of Brayla Stone. Brayla, 17, was shot and killed in the Sherwood neighborhood of North Little Rock on June 25, just days before her 18th birthday. Trevone was sentenced to a total of 50 years in prison, 40 years for first-degree murder and 10 years for unlawful use of a weapon. He has been in custody since his arrest. About a week after the murder, Trevone must serve at least 35 years before he can apply for parole, which means he will be 53 when he becomes eligible for early release. The plea agreement, negotiated by attorney Burke Moore and Deputy U.S. Attorney John Johnson, reduced Trevone's charge to 1 count of murder. Brayla was one of 44 transgender people in the United States murdered in 2020, the highest number ever recorded, though the actual number is likely higher, as 34 additional deaths have been reported since. Many other victims may not have been recorded due to misidentification of name or gender, or because their deaths were not fully reported. Ashley Marie Preston, a journalist and transgender activist, has spoken out about Brayla's murder and called for action. She also objected to the media using Brayla's birth name instead of her real name, despite Brayla's family requesting to use her pre-transition name and pronouns. Local groups will hold a candlelight vigil tonight at Bull Park in Little Rock to protest the incident. A Change.org petition has received more than 100,000 signatures to date. The Center for the Revolution in the Arts, a youth organization in Little Rock, describes Brayla as someone who always made space for others to be themselves. They invite mourners to wear red and purple, Brayla's favorite colors. On Facebook, the organization emphasizes the importance of honoring Brayla's memory and seeking justice for her. Brayla was not just an individual, but a shining example of dignity and courage. She faced many hardships and pressures that others can hardly understand. However, Brayla always maintained her faith and desire to live a free and happy life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Nicholas Wilcox. Nicholas was born on January 15, 1978 at Day Kimball Hospital in Putnam, Connecticut. Nicholas's grandfather was a boat builder, and his father devoted his life to the construction industry. After graduating in 1996, Nicholas joined the family business and became a roofer. Together with his brother Donald, he worked as a contractor and built up their own client base. At the age of 23, Nicholas got married. He and his wife Kathy, a former classmate, tied the knot. A year later, they had a daughter, and 3 years later, they had twins. During these years, Nicholas worked hard to provide a comfortable life for his family. Nicholas's family and friends say that despite his busy work schedule, he was a thoughtful and caring boyfriend and father. However, he spent too much time working, which eventually led to the breakup of the family. The divorce occurred shortly after the birth of their young children. Nevertheless, he continued to maintain communication with them and support the family. In early 2017, Nicholas sought new opportunities and moved to Florida. This new location promised better jobs and a significant increase in the number of customers and allowing for work almost all year round. Moreover, the state's warm and sunny weather created excellent conditions not only for living but also for business development. In coastal areas often affected by severe storms, so Nicholas's profession became very necessary. After each bad weather event, many houses were damaged and needed repairs and reinforcement. After returning to Connecticut to raise his family, Nicholas returned to Florida. He initially lived in an apartment in Fort Lauderdale but later moved to the suburbs to reduce housing costs. There, he lived in a duplex with his neighbors, Isabella Tagliarini and Eric Robinson. The hurricane season had begun, and Nicholas was struggling with many daily orders. At that time, a hurricane was approaching the area where he lived and worked. The storm had grown into a powerful Category 5 Atlantic tropical storm, with winds of about 177 miles per hour. An emergency warning was issued before the dangerous weather event occurred, and about 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. Nicholas spent all his time preparing buildings, reinforcing homes, boarding up windows and doors, and then helping to clean up the damage caused by the natural disaster. All of these tasks were his primary duties, so he was paid to perform them. However, he often helps others without taking any credit. In an interview, Nicholas's brother admitted that Nicholas never refused to help others. In September 2017, as Florida braced for a devastating hurricane, Nicholas was busy making plywood windows. Supply shortages had created long lines at stores. In one of those lines, a woman named Pamela approached Nicholas and told him she didn't have enough materials to reinforce her house. After hearing this, Nicholas was committed to solving the problem. That same evening, he brought her the 7 missing plywood panels and installed them in all the doors and windows of her house, refusing to accept payment, even though he had spent the entire day searching for the necessary materials. Nicholas was deeply moved by Pamela's plight. She was alone with her children and needed outside help. In response, Pamela thanked him. The storm caused a lot of devastation, leaving Nicholas with a lot of long-term work to do. So he decided to hire his next-door neighbor, a woman named Isabella, as his assistant. Her duties included cleaning up after projects and setting up tools for the job. As they spent more time together, their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship. On September 3rd, they made a special vow, which was written in blood on paper, resembling a form of engagement and a promise to live a long and happy life with many children. Although they loved each other dearly, their relationship could not be considered perfect. Almost immediately, small problems and disagreements began to arise. On September 22nd, they had a serious argument, which forced Isabella to leave the house and spend the night in a hotel. However, by the next morning, they had resolved their disagreement and reconciled. Isabella expressed that she felt a lack of attention and respect from Nicholas, while Nicholas believed that Isabella had exaggerated the problems. On October 5, 2017, on the riverbank in the suburbs of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA, a horrific incident occurred. Law enforcement officers discovered the body of a man wrapped in a tarp and tightly bound with a belt on both sides. The body was found at the bottom of a trash bin behind a local supermarket. The autopsy results revealed that the victim had suffered multiple severe blows and stab wounds. Apparently, the man had been severely beaten for an extended period. As a result, his jaw and teeth were broken, with some fragments having penetrated his respiratory tract. Most of the bones in his face and head were fractured. There were 6 blunt force injuries on his skull. In addition, he had 6 stab wounds in his neck, 7 in his throat, and several in his upper chest. The injuries on the victim's body were so severe that some areas of flesh had been cut away. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the head, substantial blood loss, and asphyxiation. The victim was identified as Nicholas Wilcox, 39, from Putnam, Connecticut, and this was confirmed by his brother. Several people have come under suspicion in the investigation into Nicholas' death, including his girlfriend, Isabella Tagliarini, and her ex-boyfriend, Eric Robinson. Both were Nicholas' neighbors in the duplex apartment where he had moved. The house was designed for 2 families, with separate living spaces, each with its own yard and entrance, a common type of property in Florida. Eric, the first tenant, sublet the vacant units, and Isabella, 38, was the first person he invited. She was from Brazil, where she worked as a flight attendant for a national airline. In 2010, she divorced and immigrated to the United States with her children. She successfully married an American, which helped her obtain her dream green card. However, that marriage lasted only until 2016, as their feelings gradually faded, leading to their separation. That same year, she began dating Eric. Her new partner was from a small town in Massachusetts, had never been married, and had no children. Their romantic relationship developed quickly, although it was occasionally tumultuous. Isabella and Eric led a passionate but complicated relationship. However, Eric often changed the way he expressed his feelings, sometimes cheerful and friendly, but at other times dark and aggressive. Due to this erratic behavior, they broke up and reconciled many times. In June 2017, shortly before Nicholas moved in, they had separated again. Nicholas had known the couple for about 6 months and maintained contact with them. When he mentioned wanting to save on rent, Eric offered him to move in and share the expenses. Initially, the 3 people had a wonderful relationship. They respected each other's personal space yet often spent time together. However, over time, problems began to arise. It turned out that Eric was using and possessing illegal substances, which explained his erratic behavior and mood swings. On August 23, 2017, Eric was arrested for possession and use of a controlled substance. He had reconciled with Isabella shortly before and was actually in a relationship with her at the time of his arrest. At the time, Nicholas was living with them under the same roof. After Eric was arrested, Nicholas and Isabella had no idea when he would be released or what their future would hold. They could be evicted at any moment, so they threw themselves into jobs to provide a steady source of income. Luckily for Nicholas, there were plenty of jobs, but not for Isabella. She struggled to find suitable work, so she started helping her neighbor in the construction industry. On October 5, 2017, a man called the local police. In the call, he introduced himself as Isabella's ex-boyfriend and asked the police to contact her, as she had information about a recent case. Although the call lacked specific details, the police immediately responded and called Isabella. From the way she spoke, it was clear that she was in a state of agitation. When asked by the police what had happened, She replied that everything was fine. The only thing that was worrying her at the time was an argument with her lover. She explained that he had left her and gone in an unknown direction. However, when the police mentioned the call from her ex-boyfriend, her tone immediately changed. She began to cry and confessed that her lover was not going anywhere, he was dead. She also added that she knew where the body was and was willing to show it to the police. Law enforcement arrived at the house to which Isabella had provided an address. The house had boarded up windows and doors, apparently in preparation for an upcoming storm. Inside, there was a strong smell of cleaning products and paint, indicating that the place had been recently cleaned. In one of the bedrooms, detectives noticed that the walls and floors had been hastily and roughly painted. This might have been done to hide something rather than for routine renovations. Their suspicions were confirmed when they discovered hydrogen peroxide containers and small bloodstains on the bedding and nightstands. It was clear that someone had replaced the old mattress and tried to clean the area, but the blood was still evident everywhere. Police suspected that this was the scene of a violent crime that Isabella had attempted to clean up but was too late to fully erase. During the conversation, she explained that she had been under the influence of sedatives during the phone call, which accounted for her unusual behavior. The mentally unstable woman was taken to the police station. At this point, the police contacted her ex-boyfriend, who provided some information about the incident. According to him, she had called him and told him about the case. According to her first testimony, around 2 a.m. on October 5th, a man had come to the duplex, then found Nicholas and her sleeping. He became angry when he saw Nicholas in the bedroom. He woke Isabella by holding a knife to her neck to prevent her from screaming. At that time, she saw Nicholas lying next to her, apparently having difficulty breathing. However, Masked Man would not let her see any further and pushed her out of the room. Masked Man then used brass knuckles and a baseball bat to beat the defenseless Nicholas. After the beating, Masked Man wrapped the body in a tarp and secured it with a belt. Under threat from Masked Man, she helped him dispose of the body. Detectives did not understand why Isabella called her ex-boyfriend instead of calling the police. Isabella explained that she felt confused and needed support and advice. According to her, the criminal had asked her to clean up and erase all traces. The criminal then returned the phone he had taken earlier and left. Isabella's confession raised suspicions and needed to be re-examined. In addition, injuries such as bruises and scratches on Isabella's body, which she claimed were caused by Masked Man after Nicholas' death, were also noted. Officers began their investigation by searching for Eric. They located his hiding place. Medical examiners and forensic pathologists were also present at the scene to conduct necessary investigations. He was released from prison on October 3rd and is currently living at a different address. During this time, he met and began living with a new woman named Merida. On the night of October 5th, Merida stated that her boyfriend received a phone call and immediately left. He returned home around 5 a.m., quickly packed his belongings, and left without explaining why. When asked if she noticed any blood on her boyfriend's clothing, Merida said she did not see anything suspicious. Eric was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles from the home. He refused to cooperate with the investigation and was subsequently detained for further questioning. During the interrogation, Eric provided an account that differed from Isabella's version of events. According to Eric, Isabella contacted him on the night of October 5th, even though she had been forbidden from contacting him immediately after his arrest. Eric also claimed that Isabella admitted to him that she had attacked Nicholas while under the influence of drugs, leading to Nicholas's death. After regaining consciousness, Isabella realized she could not solve the problem on her own and asked for help. In return, Isabella promised Eric that they would get back together and restart their relationship. Because Eric still had strong feelings for her, he agreed to these terms. The investigation revealed that Isabella is not as innocent as previously believed. In fact, she has come to the attention of police on several occasions in the past. On September 22, Nicholas and Isabella had a heated argument that extended beyond their room. Under the influence of Xanax and other drugs, Isabella became upset and destroyed some of Nicholas's belongings. Worse, she also damaged Nicholas's car. As a result, Nicholas felt compelled to contact the police regarding this incident. Isabella had an explosive personality and a hot temper, which made Nicholas fear for his life. However, they reconciled the next morning, and Nicholas withdrew the complaint. Investigators then spoke with Eric, who described Isabella as having an explosive personality and a hot temper. He also noted that Nicholas had warned her during their argument, threatening to contact immigration services if such incidents occurred again. Nicholas warned her that he would make a damaging remark that could severely affect her future. For Isabella, the opportunity to live in the United States was extremely important, so the fear of deportation was terrifying. It is possible that during another argument, Isabella might react violently and feel threatened. Her desire to remain in the United States may have motivated the crime. Detectives did not want to rely solely on existing statements, so they began interviewing people close to those involved. A key witness was Nicholas and Isabella's neighbor. The neighbor's window overlooked the courtyard of the duplex. Neighbors testified that they saw Eric arrive in his car on the night of the incident. Eric then took some tools and trash bags before driving away. The investigation into the case against Isabella yielded substantial evidence. She was summoned for questioning again on October 11th. At that time, she had not been arrested and had voluntarily come to the police station. Based on video surveillance footage, detectives determined that on that fateful night, she personally transported Nicholas's body and disposed of it in the trash. Throughout the process, she acted calmly and methodically, showing no signs of fear or agitation. She met Eric that night but remained relaxed and friendly. During further questioning, Isabella's story changed. Isabella claimed that Eric had threatened to kill her and her children, saying that she was forced to kill Nicholas. However, investigators remained cautious in their conclusions. They found the histories of both Eric and Isabella suspicious. Eric had a troubled past with the law, having come to the attention of the police in 2001 primarily for drug possession and distribution. At the same time, Isabella had many reasons to be concerned about him. In August 2016, he committed aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was arrested for strangulation and for drug possession that same year. Neighbors reported that they feared him and tried to stay away due to his aggressive and unstable behavior. The next interview with Isabella took place on October 14th. Although she claimed not to have touched Nicholas, experts found traces of her DNA on the man's body, which contradicted her testimony. According to the investigation, Isabella was involved in the violence against Nicholas, at least in the handling of the body and the destruction of evidence. However, no evidence was found to establish any specific crime. During the investigation, Isabella was briefly detained before being released and awaiting trial. People were eagerly anticipating the trial's commencement. However, due to various obstacles and delays, the trial did not take place until 5 years later. During the time, the prosecution clearly formulated its evidence and tactics, while the defense carefully reviewed all the gathered information. In addition, another important piece of evidence was discovered. The prosecution recovered Eric's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime against Nicholas. During these years, Isabella pleaded guilty to the prosecution, admitting to a lesser crime in exchange for a lighter sentence. She agreed to testify against Eric. On April 10, 2023, the trial of Eric finally took place. The prosecution argued that Eric was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas. Isabella's role was not considered that of an accomplice but rather as a witness who had tampered with evidence and helped erase evidence, which is also punishable by criminal penalties. During the trial, Eric was charged with attempted murder. Despite Torini's testimony being contradictory and inconsistent, her lawyer maintained her innocence. During the proceedings, the prosecution focused on witness testimony describing Eric's unusual behavior on the night of the murder. To avoid being monitored via GPS, Eric used his new girlfriend's car, which did not have a satellite tracking system, and he also left his cell phone at home. Other details have emerged in this case. After the incident, Isabella and Eric had a private meeting in which Isabella explained that she was under the influence of a powerful sedative and feared for her life. After reviewing the evidence, it became clear that jealousy led to Nicholas's brutal and senseless murder. Although Isabella claimed she had ended the relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. After his release, the defendant returned home, but the changes that had occurred during that time had made him even angrier and more hateful. During this period, he plotted revenge against his rival. He carried out a cold-blooded attack when the couple was most vulnerable while they were sleeping. His first attack resulted in the death of Nicholas. He then attempted to destroy the evidence by scattering it in various locations. The murder weapon was found in a dumpster, and Nicholas's body was wrapped in a tarp and hidden in a trash can. Isabella then painted over the blood splattered on the wall and cleaned up the area. Throughout these actions, Eric was in contact with Isabella and directed her actions. Ultimately, Eric, 51, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for second-degree murder. Isabella was convicted of assisting a criminal, but threats and coercion were considered mitigating factors, so she received a suspended sentence until 2026. It is noteworthy that Isabella was willing to do anything to obtain U.S. citizenship. It was revealed that 10 days after Eric was detained, he and Isabella signed another pledge in which Eric promised to marry Isabella. But he did not fulfill that promise. She is preparing to marry him right after he resolves his relationship with her ex. It seems that she does not care much about whom she marries, as long as she can maintain her U.S. citizenship. Isabella's main purpose in having relationships with men is to use them for her own benefit. In many ways, these men are all predisposed to marry. It is clear that U.S. citizenship is her top concern, even if it comes at a high price. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Kristen Trickle. Kristen Trickle was born on August 14, 1993, in a small town in southeast Nebraska. Her childhood was not particularly busy or troubled. However, her biological mother abandoned the family when Kristen was less than 3 years old. She left her husband and daughter for another man, moved to California, and never cared about their fate again. Kristen's father, James, raised his daughter alone, doing his best to ensure she lacked nothing. However, he contracted a serious illness that gradually worsened, and when Kristen turned 16, her father passed away. With no other close relatives, the girl could have been placed in a shelter until she became an adult. However, an aunt and uncle on her father's side, who lived in neighboring Kansas, intervened. Although they were raising 3 children of their own, they expressed a desire to adopt the orphan girl and did their best to ensure she had a comfortable and happy life. Soon after, the girl moved into their family home. In her new family, Kristen never felt like an outsider. Instead, her aunt and uncle treated her like their own child, showering her with love and care. Kristen was a good student who participated in art activities, helped her family with housework, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because of her love for animals. Family and friends described her as easygoing, kind, friendly, and very gentle. She was confident in pursuing her goals and spreading optimism to those around her. The Kristen's relative family was very religious, attending church regularly on Sundays. It was here that 18-year-old Kristen met Colby, a young man who was an aspiring musician, performing in a band that played music during sermons and prayer services. Colby, who had just turned 18, was very talented and dreamed of building a successful music career in the future. The two young people quickly developed a close relationship that later blossomed into romantic love. Colby was an excellent guitar player and composed his own songs, which he used to win the hearts of his loved ones. He was open, sociable, cheerful, and easy to befriend, often becoming the life of any party. After graduating from high school, he showed an interest in military affairs and decided to join the army. At the age of 18, he signed several contracts and began serving in the United States Armed Forces. Over the next 3 years, he built a solid military career. Throughout this time, he maintained regular contact with Kristen, keeping in touch and corresponding frequently. At the age of 21, Colby abruptly enlisted in the reserves, returned home, and proposed to his sweetheart, who happily accepted. They were married in April 2014. The newlywed couple settled in a small town in Kansas, where Colby finished college and pursued a music career, albeit without much success. He performed at small parties and local events, playing cover versions of popular hits. They had 2 dogs that they adored, and many considered their marriage to be quite happy. However, after many years of marriage, a terrible tragedy occurred. On a gloomy Halloween night, October 31st, 2019, around 4 a.m., an emergency call was placed to the police department. The caller, a man named Colby Trickle, reported that his wife, Kristen, had shot herself in the head with a revolver in their home. Paramedics and a nearby police cruiser were quickly dispatched to the scene. At the front door, Colby greeted the officers and allowed them inside, but he himself remained outside. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Colby remained calm. When the officers entered the bedroom, they found Kristen lying on the bed in a pool of her own blood. She had been shot with a large revolver lying on her stomach. Although she appeared to be dead, she surprisingly moved her arms, and an officer found a weak pulse and detected breathing. She was then moved to the next room and placed correctly on the floor for resuscitation efforts. However, despite these efforts, she was dead by the time the ambulance arrived, and the medical team could only confirm her death. Sergeant Brandon Hotman informed Colby that his wife had passed away. Colby repeatedly asked the officer to confirm this information. When he received confirmation, Colby began to cry. However, Colby's behavior and tears did not seem genuine, as just minutes before Brandon arrived, Colby was happily chatting with other patrolmen about video games. At first glance, it seemed that Kristen had ended her life voluntarily. However, when examining the scene, experienced detectives suspected foul play. It was Halloween night, and she seemed to have been actively preparing for the celebration. In the bedroom, on the dressing table, there were homemade costume decorations, and in the kitchen, there were children's themed foods such as lollipops and ghost-shaped gummy bears. Her death was unusual and unlike the typical manner in which a woman might pass away. First, she was found almost naked, wearing only underwear. Women often want to look beautiful even after death and worry about how they will be discovered. Second, shooting herself in the head was not a common practice for women, again due to concerns about disfiguring their bodies. Kristen's face was so badly damaged that she had to be buried in a sealed coffin. The strangest and most telling thing was that the pistol was too large and bulky for her small and fragile body. She would have had difficulty holding it. Furthermore, the position of the gun on her stomach and to the side confused the police. After realizing what had happened, Colby considered putting the gun to his head. However, he ultimately abandoned the idea and decided to call emergency services, hoping to save his loved one. While law enforcement continued to work at the scene, her cell phone lying on the nightstand suddenly went off. Kristen apparently planned and prepared for the morning, but then changed her mind and decided to end her life that night. This raised suspicions, and detectives believed that this may have been a well-orchestrated case. Colby, considered to be the prime suspect, would soon be brought in for questioning. Colby's agreed to go to the police station to give a statement. He appeared upset but not broken, remaining calm and confident. He explained that his wife, Kristen, had returned from her management job at Walmart that evening, where she was hoping to be promoted to senior manager. After that, they had been playing video games together. Colby then went to bed early because he was feeling unwell, while Kristen went into the kitchen to clean and prepare holiday sweets. In the middle of the night, Colby was awakened by a sudden loud bang. For a few seconds, he was disoriented, his ears ringing, and he could not see anything in the darkness. When he turned on the light, he saw his wife lying motionless next to him, bleeding from her head. He tried to resuscitate her but realized it was futile. He then held the pistol first to his head. But then changed his mind. He decided to place the gun on his wife's stomach and eventually called emergency services and went outside to meet the police. His actions and behavior raised many questions. For example, why did he place the weapon on his wife's stomach instead of throwing it on the floor, the bed, or leaving it on the nightstand? It is also unclear why he waited outside for the police and paramedics if he thought his wife could still be saved. Normally, in such an emergency situation, people would try to perform first aid or apply pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding. When the police arrived, he did not approach his wife, claiming that he was in shock. While a police officer was trying to perform first aid before the paramedics arrived, Colby did not appear concerned or ask about the situation. Instead, he casually chatted outside with a patrol officer about music and video games. When he learned that Kristen had died, he tried to calm down after shedding a few tears. At the police station, Colby was asked if Kristen had life insurance. He replied that she did not, but added that he was entitled to some small payments from the armed forces, where he had served. Colby then began to brag about his accomplishments, that he had served in intelligence and participated in special operations around the world. His explanation sounded convincing, but almost everything he said turned out to be inaccurate. When asked why his wife might have committed such a desperate act, he explained that she had suffered from symptoms of depression since childhood. Colby's statement sounded convincing, and he spoke confidently and calmly. However, experienced investigators believed that he was lying and that he may have prepared what he would say. Nevertheless, they had no concrete evidence to charge him at the time, so Colby was released. When Kristen's relatives were informed of her tragic death, they quickly traveled to Hayes, 500 miles from where they lived, to meet with the police and make funeral arrangements. They were unanimous in denying that she had taken her own life, citing her deep religious beliefs, regular church attendance, and the belief that such an act was sinful. According to her family, Kristen was an optimistic, life-loving person with ambitious plans for the future. She wanted to open a shelter for homeless animals and had been looking for an available property with a large plot of land that she planned to lease long-term for this purpose. Detectives also confirmed that she had been in negotiations to lease the property. She was expecting a promotion at work and was proud of her position. She was also preparing costumes and candy for Halloween and had promised to visit her sister on her birthday in mid-November. Her relatives insisted that she had never suffered from depression and had no mental disorders or harmful habits. Another important point they stressed was that she would never abandon her dogs. In their discussions with the police, her aunt and uncle suggested that Colby may have treated his wife in a cold, staged manner to make it appear that she had voluntarily left this world. They described her husband as a cruel, domineering man who tried to control every aspect of her interactions, throwing tantrums if Kristen did not return his calls or texts immediately. Her husband had forced her not to talk to her family and to call them in secret, without telling him. family visits were rare. On her last visit, she told her husband that she could no longer stand the treatment and that if things did not improve, they would have to divorce. The results of the forensic examination and the expert opinions after interviews with Colby and Kristen's family led detectives to believe that the forensic report would be crucial in the case. The forensic report found only one gunshot wound to the chin. The bullet was fired while she was lying on her back, with the barrel of the gun pressed against her head. It is possible that she inflicted the wound herself, although it is highly unlikely that she did so. There were no signs of struggle or resistance on Kristen's body. However, after learning from relatives that Colby had been violent and controlling, detectives requested a further examination for any signs of bruising, abrasions, scratches, or other injuries in various stages of healing. They hypothesized that if he occasionally abused his wife, there would be signs of it. However, the investigation was disappointing because no injuries were found on her, except for the gunshot wound. During the investigation, the authorities studied Colby thoroughly, including his personality. Through this, they discovered that Colby was a pathological liar. He had a habit of lying frequently and very convincingly, to the point that he seemed to believe his own lies. Colby provided false information about his musical achievements and income to those around him, even though he was not involved in intelligence activities or any hotspots, and convinced everyone during the interrogation that he was telling the truth. Kristen, a hard worker, had been the main economic pillar for the family for many years. In contrast, Colby only had income from occasional performances during the holidays, and the rest of his time was spent playing video games. Although Colby had real talent, he lacked perseverance and patience and was hindered by his own laziness. Police conducted a search of Kristen's phone apps and found a wealth of information. They found a phone calendar filled with everything from haircuts to meetings with a real estate agent. Also, Colby's text messages showed that he had openly flirted with another woman and exchanged messages while at the police station. On the laptop in the living room, a search history from before the incident was recovered, showing that Colby had searched for life insurance benefits in case of the death of a loved one. This was particularly important to the authorities. The check showed that Colby had lied, as he had purchased 2 insurance policies for his wife, with himself as the beneficiary if she died. The contracts included insurance for his wife, along with a standard life insurance policy. The amount involved was significant, contradicting his previous statements. He had even calculated exactly how much he would receive. Although the direct allegations from the victim's relatives were critical of Colby and suggested clear motives, the final decision still depended on the forensic expert's report. According to the documents, there were no signs of violence on the victim's body other than the gunshot wound, which suggested that the victim most likely ended her life voluntarily. The case was closed and archived. At that time, Colby had received compensation from 2 insurance policies related to his wife. Specifically, he received nearly $50,000 from one special insurance policy and more than $100,000 from another life insurance policy. Once the money was deposited into the account, he purchased a lifelike doll from an online store. He also bought a new video game console, an electric guitar, and expensive musical equipment, and then spent the rest on clothing and entertainment, especially going to bars and restaurants almost every night. Colby was enjoying life, not saving money for himself, and believed that the matter was over since there was no evidence against him and, therefore, no potential charges. He lived happily for about 2 years until a significant event occurred in the summer of 2021. A new prosecutor was appointed. The detectives in charge of the Kristen Trickle case asked the new prosecutor for help. They wanted permission to reopen the investigation on the grounds that there was no doubt Colby had killed his wife. To prove Colby's guilt, the prosecutor presented strange and unusual evidence, including the recovery of the suspect's web browsing history and pointing to his clear actions and motives. After reviewing the relevant documents, the prosecutor decided to reopen the case, and Colby was arrested in July 2021. He was charged with first-degree manslaughter and willful obstruction of justice. While in custody, he remained calm and immediately contacted his attorneys, who began working on his defense. Colby's defense relied on the results of the medical examiner's examination, which revealed that Kristen had suffered from chronic depression for many years and that her tragic death was only a matter of time. During the trial, the attorneys attempted to portray their client as a loving husband, a brave soldier, and a person of good faith. However, without the results of the psychological autopsy, the investigation could have been crippled because it relied too heavily on the same medical findings. To help clarify the case and the investigation, the prosecution took a new step by bringing in experienced psychologists. They conducted a psychological analysis of the victim and investigated her emotional state immediately before the incident. This method is called a psychological autopsy or psychological exhumation. Psychiatrists conducted a comprehensive assessment of Kristen's situation, including analyzing data from her phone, social media posts, recent photographs, and interviews with relatives, friends, and colleagues. Although the process of collecting and analyzing this information took months, the experts' conclusion was clear that Kristen did not intend to end her life, as she still had both short-term and long-term plans. Legal proceedings related to this complex case were not initiated until September 2023, nearly 4 years after the incident. The defendant had clear motives, behaved suspiciously, and repeatedly lied during interrogation, but the initial conclusions of forensic experts were favorable to him. However, the prosecution now had another report that could potentially change the outcome of the case. When asked about the insurance claim web queries on his computer, Colby said it was possible his wife had filed a claim to get paid. However, the timing of the claim contradicts his statement, as his wife was confirmed to be at work at the time. The store's surveillance cameras proved it. When asked about the life-size doll he had purchased even before burying his late wife, along with other expenses, he said that he could not sleep alone and needed someone to be with him. He explained that he had purchased several other items, such as a console and a guitar, to help ease the sadness of losing his wife. The defendant's mother corroborated her son's testimony, vigorously defending him throughout the trial. The psychologist's conclusions about the victim's emotional state were crucial. This detailed assessment took time, but the results confirmed that Kristen did not intend to finish off herself. Important details regarding the angle of the bullet were presented in the autopsy report. In court, the jury was shown the weapon used and the angle at which the bullet struck the victim's chin. Although Kristen was right-handed, the injuries suggested that she had either fired with her left hand or that a third person had held a gun to her head while she was asleep and fired. On November 20, 2023, the jury unanimously found Colby guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 50 years. He has always denied his guilt, but all of his appeals have been denied. Notably, in this case, amendments to the medical report regarding the cause of death were never made. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Heidi Firkus. Heidi Marie Eriksson was born on December 14, 1984, to John and Alinda Eriksson, and was the youngest of their 3 children and their only daughter. She was known for her playful and artistic nature, and lived her life to the fullest. After graduating from high school in 2003, she continued her education at the University of Northwestern in Roseville. During this time, she was a regular attendee at Calvary Church in the city, where she had been involved since her early years. It was at Calvary Church that she met Nick Firkus, with whom she shared the role of youth group leaders, serving their community with dedication and passion. Nicholas Firkus was born on February 25, 1983, to Julie and Steve Firkus. He was a driven and ambitious young man who dedicated himself to his work as the director of operations at a reputable carpet cleaning company. Known for his well-rounded personality and strong work ethic, he had found his true match in Heidi, whom he met at their shared place of worship, Calvary Church, in 2005. At the ages of 22 and 20, respectively, Nick and Heidi made the joyful decision to take their relationship to the next level. Surrounded by their loved ones and the familiar walls of the church that had witnessed the blossoming of their love, they exchanged vows, sealing their commitment to each other. To their friends and community, Nick and Heidi's marriage appeared perfect. They shared a love for travel, biking, and their church. They often hosted dinner parties for their loved ones. Heidi had recently started working at a financial firm where her father was employed. Their bond seemed to be growing stronger with time. However, behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. On the morning of April 25, 2010, Heidi called 911 from her home in St. Paul, Minnesota, reporting a break-in. Only 38 seconds into the call, Heidi yelled no, and a gunshot was heard. 65 seconds later, Nick used Heidi's phone to contact the dispatcher, saying, "Please, someone just broke into my house and shot me and my wife." Nick was overcome with grief, repeatedly crying and begging for help, saying, "Oh my Heidi, my wife is dead, please get here." He also shouted no in despair. When the police arrived, they found Heidi unresponsive on the kitchen floor with a gunshot wound to her back. Nick was beside her, still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, despite having been shot in the upper left leg. He was extremely upset and told the police that one or two intruders had broken into their home. According to Nick, he had grabbed his shotgun and tried to escape with Heidi through the back door, heading towards their detached garage. However, the intruder managed to take the shotgun from him and shot both Nick and Heidi. Sadly, Heidi was pronounced dead at the scene, her life cut short by the tragic events. Nick, meanwhile, was rushed to the hospital for treatment and was later questioned by the police while still in the hospital. Police asked Nick why he and Heidi left the safety of their bedroom to face the potential danger. Nick explained that they were trying to escape through the back door. After receiving medical treatment for his wounds at the hospital, Nick was released just 3 hours later and was interviewed again at the police station about the incident. At the police station, Nick provided a detailed account of what happened. He recalled watching a movie with Heidi and having a glass of wine before going to bed around midnight. Nick said he woke up around 6:10 to 6:15 a.m. when he heard the screen door open and someone fiddling with the doorknob. The investigators questioned Nick about locking the deadbolt, and he admitted that he and Heidi usually made sure to lock it, but he believed he had forgotten to do so that particular night. After hearing the noises, Nick retrieved his shotgun from the upstairs closet, which he had brought up from the basement a month ago because he noticed it was starting to rust. Although the shotgun was initially empty, Nick loaded it when he heard the noises. He then woke up Heidi, instructed her to call 911, and told her to leave the house and go to the garage where their cars were parked. Nick also shared that he and Heidi had a safety plan in place in case of trouble, which was to go to the garage where their cars were parked. Nick, who is right-handed, was holding a pair of jeans in his right hand and a shotgun in his left hand as he walked behind Heidi toward the garage. They stopped at the front door, where Heidi retrieved her wallet from a table. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a tall, dark-skinned man rushed in. The intruder wore a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled tightly around his face. Nick dropped the jeans, and the intruder grabbed the shotgun barrel. The two men then engaged in a physical struggle. During the altercation, the gun fired, and Nick said his finger accidentally slipped onto the trigger. He believed he hit Heidi in the back, causing her to collapse immediately. They continued fighting over the shotgun, which fired again, hitting Nick in the upper thigh and causing him to fall to the ground. The intruder then fled out the front door. Nick told investigators that Heidi was unresponsive, and he eventually lost consciousness. Nick told the police that his house was supposed to be foreclosed the next day, and he and his partner Heidi had planned to inform their parents and friends about their situation on the same day. According to Nick, they had fallen behind on their bills, and their house had been foreclosed on and sold to someone else. As a result, they were required to vacate the premises, but they hadn't shared this information with anyone. Their plan was to pack up their belongings on Sunday and Monday morning, leaving some items in the garage to collect later, and then find someone to stay with temporarily. However, their plans were disrupted, and their peaceful home was left with an air of tragedy. The lives of Nick and Heidi were forever changed by the devastating events of that morning. The investigation continued, with law enforcement securing the area and interviewing residents. None of the neighbors reported seeing anyone leaving the Furcus residence. However, one neighbor, Brendan O'Connell, who was looking after kittens in a nearby house, told the authorities that he heard an argument followed by gunfire. Nick begged for mercy, claiming a shooter had attacked him and a woman. After talking to police, Nick's lawyer hired an artist to update the sketch, details emerging: an African-American male, 40 to 60 years old. The police initially searched for an unknown African-American male intruder based on Nick's description, but found no evidence or witnesses to support his story. Despite a thorough investigation, no one was arrested or charged in connection with Heidi's death, leaving the case unsolved for many years. Years later, a surprising revelation came to light. Over 10 years had passed since Heidi's murder, and Nick had seemingly moved on with his life, marrying Rachel and starting a family. However, when financial troubles resurfaced, Rachel began to suspect that Nick was hiding something. Rachel's concerns about their financial situation and Nick's evasiveness sparked her curiosity, prompting her to investigate Nick's past. As she dug deeper, she uncovered secrets and inconsistencies that made her question everything she thought she knew about her husband and his possible involvement in Heidi's death. Rachel was unaware of the financial troubles her husband Nick was hiding, similar to those he had faced with his previous wife Heidi years earlier. Her concerns prompted her to contact the authorities, which renewed interest in Heidi's murder case. Investigators began looking into Nick's second marriage to Rachel, whom he married in 2012. However, by the time Rachel spoke with the authorities, she had already divorced Nick due to his growing financial problems. Before their 2019 divorce, Rachel had recorded a conversation where she confronted Nick about his deception. She told investigators that Nick was repeating the same patterns he had with Heidi, including failing to pay property taxes. In fact, she had seen a letter warning that they would be evicted by 2020 if the taxes weren't paid. Rachel's decision to contact the police with her suspicions set off a chain of events that would once again bring the Heidi Fergus murder case into the spotlight. Sergeant Nicole Sipes, assigned to the case, listened carefully to Rachel's concerns and began re-examining the evidence. Sergeant Nicole Sykes of the St. Paul Police Department was determined to solve Heidi's murder. To uncover the truth, she made a bold decision to ask the FBI to analyze the 911 call audio recordings. She hoped to find crucial clues that could explain what happened on the night of the murder. The FBI's analysis yielded a surprising result. It found no evidence of a third person being present during the incident. This discovery contradicted the husband's earlier statement to the police, leaving Sergeant Sipes and her team puzzled. If only Heidi and her husband were in the house, what led to her death? The absence of a third person increased suspicion around the husband's possible involvement in the crime. Sergeant Sipes was more determined than ever to uncover the truth and bring justice to Heidi and her grieving family. The FBI's findings opened up a new avenue of investigation, which Sergeant Sipes was committed to pursuing with increased intensity. The investigators obtained financial documents that disputed Nicholas Fergus's earlier statements, further implicating him in Heidi's murder. Fergus's account of the events surrounding Heidi's death kept changing. Initially, he claimed that an intruder took his gun and shot both him and Heidi. Later, he said that the intruder didn't take the gun, but his own finger accidentally pulled the trigger, hitting Heidi in the back. The crime scene investigation yielded no signs of a struggle, such as overturned furniture or marks on the walls, contradicting Fergus's account. Forensic analysis of the scene also disputed Fergus's version of the shooting, particularly the trajectory of the bullet that struck Heidi. Furthermore, Heidi's 911 call made no mention of an intruder, and there was no evidence of a break-in or intruder at the crime scene. This lack of evidence led investigators to suspect that Fergus had planned to cover up his involvement in Heidi's death. As a result, an arrest warrant was issued for Nick Fergus on May 19, 2021, over a decade after Heidi's death. A SWAT team arrested Fergus at his home in Mounds View. The surprise arrest of Nick stemmed from Rachel's suspicions and the tireless efforts of Police Sergeant Nicole Sipes. This sudden development astonished many who thought the case had stalled and would never reach a resolution. As the legal proceedings progressed, the case details would be re-examined, and the truth about that fateful night would gradually emerge. At the trial, Nick Fergus maintained that he was innocent and pleaded not guilty. Many of his family members, including his father, claimed to believe in his innocence, stating that Nick's love for Heidi would have prevented him from committing such a violent act. However, the jury disagreed with their assessment. On February 10, 2023, the jury delivered a shocking verdict after deliberating for 10 hours. They found Nick, the person Heidi trusted most, guilty of her brutal murder. This outcome left everyone who knew Heidi in a state of shock and disbelief. The prosecution built a strong case against Nick by showing that he was facing severe financial difficulties, which they argued led him to kill Heidi to avoid shame and conflict. They questioned the truth of Nick's claim that a home invader was responsible, suggesting that he fabricated the story to divert attention from himself. The prosecution presented convincing evidence, including the lack of signs of forced entry and inconsistencies in Nick's account. Notably, there was no DNA or physical evidence to support the presence of an intruder, which raised serious doubts about Nick's story. Prosecutor Rachel Craker argued that Nick's inability to accept the truth of his financial deception led him to commit a shocking crime, sacrificing Heidi's life to preserve his reputation. In contrast, Nick's defense attorney, Robert Richmond, countered that it didn't make sense for Nick's financial problems to suddenly drive him to murder. Nick claimed that killing his wife would somehow boost his reputation, but this statement is illogical. After intense debates during the trial, the jury finally reached a verdict that would determine whether Nick would be held accountable for Heidi's death. The jury carefully considered the evidence, emotional testimonies, and legal arguments before delivering a unanimous verdict. Nick Fergus was guilty of first-degree murder. On April 13, 2023, the judge handed down the most severe sentence possible: life in prison without parole. Although found guilty, Nick still insists he had nothing to do with Heidi's death. He maintains his innocence even after being sentenced. When he was sentenced, Nick said, "I understand the pain and loss felt by everyone here today. Justice has been served, but it came at a great cost. A broken family, a betrayed community, and a life cut short." The verdict brought a sense of closure to Heidi's family and friends, but it also left them with the painful realization that the man they thought they knew was capable of such a heinous act. So, you must be thinking, where is Nick now? Nick is currently serving his life sentence at the Minnesota Correctional Facility located in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Here's what drove Nick to commit the tragic act. The motive behind the killing remains unclear, but there are clues. In June 2009, Nick received foreclosure papers on their house, which was then sold at a sheriff's auction the same month. 10 months before Heidi's death, eviction proceedings began in February 2010, with a hearing scheduled for March 8, 2010. Nick attended the hearing alone. Initially, the lockout was set for April 9, 2010, but Nick called the attorneys, claiming his grandmother was in the hospital and about to die. He requested the lockout be rescheduled for April 26, 2010. However, investigators found no evidence to support this claim. When questioned, Nick said Heidi was aware of their financial troubles and that they had made plans together to move out of their foreclosed home and start fresh elsewhere. The truth behind a tragic event was finally revealed by prosecutors. A husband, Nick, had been hiding their severe financial struggles from his wife, Heidi. Tragically, before she could discover the truth, he took her life. Instead of being honest with his wife and working together to find a solution, Nick chose a devastating path. According to prosecutors, Nick's motive for killing his wife was his shame and fear of revealing their financial problems, which included $118,000 in credit card debt and 22 months of late mortgage payments. By killing Heidi, Nick avoided confronting the consequences of his own deception. In the end, justice was served, but Heidi's loved ones still suffered immense pain and loss. Unfortunately, no legal punishment could undo the harm or bring back the vibrant life that was cruelly taken. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry had been born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, the youngest of 10 children. Her parents had faced significant difficulties providing for their large family, leading Crystal and her siblings to grow up independent. Crystal and her siblings had always wanted to build their own lives as soon as possible. They eventually moved to different cities and states in search of new opportunities. Crystal had met her future husband Tom in high school. Crystal and Tom married and initially moved to California, but Crystal soon discovered that life in the city was not right for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine, settling in the small town of Bridgeton, about an hour from Crystal's hometown of Rumford. Crystal found a job at a local shoe store, while Tom worked various odd jobs. Crystal and Tom's lives took a new turn when Crystal became pregnant and they welcomed daughter Sarah. Although Tom was initially excited to become a father, Sarah's arrival complicated Tom's relationship with Crystal. Tom began spending more and more time at a local bar, spending almost all of their limited income on alcohol. One time, he even took the money Crystal had saved to buy alcohol, leaving them with almost nothing. As Tom's drinking habits worsened, the family did not have enough money for basic needs, including food. Finally, Crystal decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom occasionally saw Sarah, but he was largely absent from her life. The situation got worse when Tom got a new girlfriend and she started harassing Crystal. This girlfriend would call Crystal, make threats, come to her house, and cause provocations, all because she was upset with Crystal's past relationship with Tom. Crystal's fears for Sarah's safety grew and she became hesitant to let her daughter visit Tom, worried that Tom's new girlfriend might actually harm Sarah. Crystal moved in with her mother and worked hard to save enough money to buy her own house. After years of saving, she bought a small house near a peaceful lake on the outskirts of Bridgeton. Crystal was excited to provide a stable and loving environment for her daughter, Sarah. Crystal prioritized giving Sarah the attention and love she deserved. In their free time, Crystal and Sarah enjoyed spending quality time together, often watching movies or chatting with each other. One day was like any other day. Crystal went to work and Sarah went to school. They had their usual dinner together, and Crystal carried Sarah to bed. However, a few hours later, Sarah's peaceful night was broken by a loud scream that startled her. At first, she thought Crystal was arguing on the phone, but it quickly became clear that there was something much more serious going on with Crystal. Crystal had been screaming loudly in the kitchen, causing Sarah to fear that her mother was being attacked. The bedroom door had been slightly open, but the kitchen was out of sight. Stiff with fear, Sarah could not move or make a sound. As she listened, she heard footsteps approaching, making her think that the next attacker would come for her. Feeling scared, she quickly hid behind the bed. However, the footsteps stopped, and Sarah heard the sound of a kitchen drawer opening, followed by the clatter of someone rummaging through utensils. Crystal's screams continued, filled with pleas for mercy, until she was stabbed. With each stab, Crystal's voice grew weaker. Sarah realized she could do nothing and would likely be killed as well. After her mother's screams stopped, she left the room and went into the kitchen, where she witnessed a terrible scene. Her mother lay in a large pool of blood covering the floor. Confused, Sarah asked her neighbors for help and eventually found an Italian restaurant whose owner lived in an adjacent building. They opened the door for Sarah and called 911 to report the incident. The officers immediately went to their home. Upon arrival, officers witnessed a gruesome scene. The kitchen was covered in blood, including the floors, walls, and kitchen appliances. Crystal had died, and medical experts determined that Crystal had lost too much blood. Police found a handprint on the front door glass, possibly Sarah's. No other fingerprints were found, but there were many bloody shoe prints on the kitchen floor. Investigators took photos to determine the shoe size and model, assuming they belonged to the killer. A trail of blood led to Sarah's bedroom but suddenly stopped as if the killer had changed his mind. One particular detail caught the detective's attention. The killer had tried to wipe away some blood on the floor. With the blood stains spreading, this effort seemed futile. Further investigation revealed that some of the drops of blood on the floor were irregularly shaped, suggesting they had fallen from the knife. This led investigators to believe that drops of blood might have flown out of the knife during the attack. Investigations showed that, in addition to the initial drops of blood, other drops of blood on the floor appeared to have fallen at a 90-degree angle, suggesting they originated from a higher point. Detectives suspected these drops might belong to the perpetrator, who might have been injured during the crime. Further supporting this theory, the trail of blood drops led directly to a roll of tissue. This showed that the perpetrator used a tissue to stop the bleeding before hastily leaving the scene. Autopsy results showed that Crystal's body had suffered more than 50 stab wounds. The murder weapon, possibly a kitchen knife, was not found at the crime scene, suggesting the perpetrator might have brought it with him. An important detail revealed that the force used was so great that part of the knife broke and was stuck in Crystal's body. The investigation also found evidence of a previous sexual assault. As a result, medical experts were able to collect and analyze the perpetrator's semen along with the blood samples obtained, sending both for further laboratory testing. However, there was a problem. The local DNA laboratory was severely understaffed due to funding problems, leading to a significant backlog. As a result, detectives had to begin the investigation without forensic evidence, which would take at least 6 months to process. The investigation began by ruling out robbery as a motive because nothing was missing from the house. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry, so the police suspected that the victim had arbitrarily opened the door to let the perpetrator in. Since she was wearing pajamas, it was unlikely that she was expecting visitors. Detectives came up with 2 theories. Either the victim knew her killer, or someone she didn't know knocked on her door and convinced her to let them in under false pretenses. To pursue this lead, detectives turned their attention to the only witness, Sarah, who was undergoing a medical examination at the hospital. The police began questioning Sarah about the killer, and she explained that she had stayed in the bedroom until the incident was over. However, the police were a bit skeptical about her story. They asked her how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife, and Sarah replied that it was obvious. Despite her reaction, detectives continued to pressure her, suspecting that she might have been withholding information and might have seen the perpetrator. During the first 3 days after the murder, police questioned Sarah 18 times in the hope that her story would change. However, she always maintained that everything happened as she initially described. Meanwhile, detectives pursued other leads and achieved their first breakthrough. They discovered a pair of boots at a local shoe store whose sole pattern resembled bloody footprints found at the crime scene. Additionally, they learned that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend. Despite evidence that the killer was a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa, considering her history of threatening to kill Crystal. Maybe Teresa had found an accomplice to commit the crime. However, detectives found no evidence to support this theory. Further investigation revealed that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years ago when Dennis started working at the shoe store. Dennis and Crystal began dating, and Dennis eventually proposed to her. Although Crystal accepted, they never married. Their relationship was tense, with frequent arguments and Dennis engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking objects and banging on walls. However, there was no evidence that he ever physically harmed Crystal. The day after Crystal's murder, detectives visited Dennis at his home. When they asked if he had left the house the night before or if he had seen Crystal, Dennis immediately asked if she was dead and then fainted. After regaining consciousness, he answered the detectives' questions. Dennis explained that he had planned to visit Crystal that evening but was delayed because he was helping a friend fix his car. When he later called Crystal, she said it was too late, leading to an argument and Dennis staying home. Police were able to verify Dennis' alibi, confirming that he had helped his friend that evening. Dennis also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception, except when asked if he felt responsible for Crystal's death. He replied no, but the test detected his tremors. Additionally, detectives discovered that Dennis had the same shoe size as the killer, but no matching shoes were found in his house. Dennis agreed to provide a DNA sample but made a special request. Dennis had made a special request to the detectives. If they decided to arrest him, he had asked them to enter his workplace through the back door, instead of the main entrance. He had explained that he did not want to disrupt the work environment or make noise in front of his colleagues because his boss had always treated him kindly. However, because he had continued to claim innocence, this request had raised suspicions. The police investigation had led to another important discovery. They had contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town, and she had revealed that Crystal had confided in her just weeks before the murder. Crystal had expressed her fear towards Dennis, saying their arguments had escalated and had become more and more heated. Dennis' behavior had also become more and more aggressive, causing Crystal to consider ending their relationship. However, she had hesitated to do so because she was afraid of his reaction. Detectives had also interviewed one of Crystal's co-workers, but she had not provided any useful information during their conversation. However, as soon as the police had left, Dennis had gone to the person's workplace and had begun asking about her conversation with the detectives. The police investigation had continued despite the lack of evidence against the initial suspect, as DNA test results would have taken several months to process. Meanwhile, they had pursued other leads. A strange tip had led them to a local man named Donnie, who had allegedly bragged about killing Crystal while drunk at a party. However, when questioned, Donnie had claimed to have no memory of the party and had denied any involvement in the murder. The police investigation into Crystal's murder had had difficulty finding any concrete clues. In an effort to uncover new information, Crystal's family had offered a $10,000 reward and had distributed flyers around town. However, Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, had been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers, raising suspicions. The ex-husband, Tom, had been thoroughly investigated but had eventually been ruled out as a suspect due to his severe alcoholism. His heavy daily drinking had made it unlikely he would commit a crime, and he had had no clear motive. Police had also investigated two other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but had found no evidence linking them to the crime. All three men, including Tom, had provided DNA samples to be sent to a laboratory for analysis. 9 months after the murder, the lab results had finally come in, but they hadn't matched any of the suspects, including Dennis. This had left detectives with no new leads. They had asked to take Dennis's DNA sample again for further testing, but the results had still been the same. The investigation into Crystal's murder had hit a dead end, causing detectives to reinvestigate their only witness, Sarah. They had suspected that Sarah might be hiding information or that a traumatic experience had caused her to repress memories of the killer. To question her further, police had gone to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt. A polygraph test had been administered to Sarah, but the results hadn't shown any deception. Despite this, investigators had continued to question her for days, asking the same questions over and over again. However, Sarah had always maintained that she had not seen the killer. The case had remained unsolved for several years. Police had continued to interview potential suspects and follow up on leads. But to no avail. The breakthrough had come in the late 1990s with the introduction of the FBI's DNA database. Investigators had uploaded the killer's DNA sample, but unfortunately, no matches had been found. The detective asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to try to recall any repressed memories of the crime. Even though Sarah agreed, the psychologist ultimately concluded that she really didn't remember anything and was telling the truth about not seeing the killer. The case remained unsolved for many years. Detectives continued to investigate but found no new leads. This changed in 2006 when a surprising development occurred. A DNA sample was entered into the FBI database and it matched blood and semen left at the crime scene where Crystal was killed. The DNA belonged to a man named Michael Hutchinson, who was never suspected in the case. Detectives discovered that in 2003, Hutchinson was arrested for assault and threatening with a weapon, resulting in a sentence of 6 months in prison and 3 years of probation. During his arrest, a DNA sample was collected, but it was not uploaded to the FBI database at the time. It was instead stored in a laboratory. 3 years after the initial DNA sample was taken, Michael was arrested for drunk driving with his children. He was released on bail but failed to appear in court, leading to jail time. Ironically, Michael was arrested on the day of the wedding and put in a prison cell. His DNA sample was retrieved and quickly uploaded to the database. The detective contacted Sarah, informing her of the development but asked her to keep the information confidential until formal charges were filed. When asked if she knew the suspect, Sarah replied that she did not. Given that Michael was already in custody, the detective carefully built the case to prevent any possibility of him evading punishment. Further investigation revealed that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's residence. When he was 19, Michael lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. He regularly drove to his mother's house, which was just a short distance from Crystal's, meaning he often passed by her residence. The detective discovered that Michael could have easily encountered Crystal multiple times before the murder. When questioned in prison, Michael insisted he was not involved in Crystal's murder and denied knowing her, despite the presence of his semen and blood on her body at the crime scene. The detective found his denial unconvincing. During the visit to the prison, the detective observed a noticeable scar on Michael's palm. This was very significant because it was likely that Crystal's killer injured his hand during the crime. While this alone would not have been enough evidence in court, combined with DNA evidence, it contributed to Michael's eventual murder charge. According to the prosecution, Michael, an illegal drug user, saw Crystal as he passed her house on the night of the murder. He decided to assault her, leading to her death. While Michael refused to confess, The available evidence clearly showed that he was responsible for the assault and murder of Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was found for the murderer's lack of fingerprints at the crime scene. It turned out that Michael's job as a bricklayer was the reason. Over time, the constant wear and tear on his hands had erased the patterns on his palms, making it impossible for him to leave fingerprints. Michael presented testimony about his timeline to defend himself. He claimed he had met Crystal at a bar and they had returned to her place to have consensual sex. However, his story became suspicious when he described a strange man wearing a black motorcycle jacket breaking into the house, knocking him unconscious, and killing Crystal. When Michael regained consciousness, he allegedly tried to fight off the attacker but had injured his hand. The attacker then fled, and Michael also left the crime scene without a reasonable explanation. Michael's story was very unconvincing. The investigation revealed that the only shoe prints at the scene had belonged to Michael. If his story was true, the intruder would have had to take off his shoes before entering the house, which still wouldn't have explained the lack of other marks on the floor. Furthermore, no witnesses had come forward to confirm that Crystal had been at the bar with Michael. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with Michael being unanimously found guilty. As a result, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole and remained incarcerated. Sarah's life was deeply affected by her mother's death, but she found the strength to move forward with time. She pursued further education, became a writer, and wrote a book about her mother's murder. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Christina Carlin Croft. Christina Rose Carlin Croft was born on November 11, 1983, in a coastal town in southern New Jersey, to Stuart Croft and Deanne Carlin. She had a natural flair for being in front of the camera, which would eventually shape her career path. After graduating from high school in Linwood in 2000, Christina worked as a waitress in southern New Jersey and later at the Borgata Hotel Casino and Spa in Atlantic City for several years. However, her ultimate dream was to become a model, and her determination paid off. She eventually found success in the modeling industry. In her promotional material, Christina revealed that she enjoyed participating in photo shoots featuring high-end lingerie and swimwear. According to Eva Waltz, a friend she met on a 3-day Maxim magazine shoot, Christina was a charming and beautiful woman with a great sense of humor. With dark hair and blue eyes, she embodied the essence of a fashion model. Christina had always dreamed of being on the cover of Playboy. In 2003, while working as a waitress at the Borgata Casino, she met Alex Urtielli. They started dating soon after, and Alex became her supportive partner, never opposing her career choices. After a long-term relationship, they got engaged. The couple stayed together until Christina's death. Christina achieved her goal of becoming Cybergirl of the Month for May 2009 and was invited to the Playboy Mansion. She attended parties at the mansion, gaining entry into the glamorous world. This success marked the peak of her career, and her ambitions soared, especially after meeting Hugh Hefner, whose attention was hard to capture. However, despite this, Christina failed to become a Playboy magazine model. Thousands of girls send their photos to the magazine, but only one is chosen. At 26, Christina was considered too old for the magazine, which typically features younger models. This setback affected her confidence, but she continued modeling. Her extensive portfolio included work with Redken, Maxim, Victoria's Secret, Vanity Fair, and many others. To further her career, Christina moved to New York with her boyfriend Alex. However, not all brands were willing to work with her due to her explicit photo shoot. Christina's career began to decline after her appearance in Playboy, ultimately coming to an end. Overcoming this challenging period in her life was undoubtedly tough, but she always had Alex's support. Known for her elegant appearance, captivating beauty, and scandalous behavior, Christina made headlines in 2016 for causing a scene at the Smith, a restaurant in New York. According to law enforcement sources and court documents, Christina Carling-Craft, 34, and her male companion got into an argument with the manager, Sergei Anakin, on March 6th over their bill. The man refused to pay, and the manager intervened. Witnesses claim Christina was drunk and falsely accused the manager of pushing her. But surveillance footage proved otherwise. She allegedly struck someone in the neck around 10 p.m., causing redness and significant pain. Christina was charged with misdemeanor assault, attempted assault, and harassment. However, the DA offered her a deal, and the charges were dropped on the condition that she remains trouble-free for 6 months. Christina has always had a fondness for Philadelphia, particularly Ardmore, which she considered a safe haven. With this in mind, Alex purchased an apartment in Ardmore in 2018 and relocated to Pennsylvania with her. However, Christina soon discovered that Ardmore wasn't as safe as she had thought. On August 18, 2018, she contacted the police to report a robbery. Earlier that evening, Christina had spent time at a bar in Philadelphia, but her memories of the night were hazy. The next thing she recalled was waking up the following morning, feeling groggy and suspecting that someone had drugged her with illegal substances. She had no recollection of how she got home or if anyone had accompanied her. At the time, Alex was away on a business trip. Feeling uneasy and anxious, Christina repeatedly expressed her concerns about her safety. During the investigation, police obtained CCTV footage showing a car arriving at Christina's apartment around 3 a.m. Unconscious in the back seat, Christina was being driven by a thief who stole her keys, entered her home, and plundered over $50,000 worth of valuables, including jewelry, designer bags, pillows, sunglasses, a credit card, and personal documents. The thief remained in the apartment for about an hour and a half before returning to the car, helping Christina inside, and then leaving her in the hallway. They placed the keys back in her purse and drove away. The police swiftly identified the perpetrator using a credit card statement. The driver was Andre Melton, a man with a prior criminal record. He was driving a rented 2018 Kia Sorento with Virginia license plates. Witnesses reported seeing the same car near Christina's house on August 17th, which was confirmed by police using specialized license plate recognition software. While the police were still searching for Andre Melton to recover Christina's stolen items, a far more serious crime took place. Just 4 days later, on August 22, 2018, Alex Celli called the police, asking them to check on his girlfriend, Christina Carling-Craft, as he was unable to contact her and was on his way home. Christina wasn't answering her calls or texts. Upon arriving home, Alex found the apartment door locked from the inside. He then checked the security system, revealing that someone had opened the front door and the balcony door during the night. The police were called to the address and had to force entry by breaking down the front door, which was locked from the inside. Upon entering the apartment, they were immediately met with signs of a crime scene, including visible blood. A body lay on the bed, covered with a blanket. Lifting the blanket, they found a woman who had been severely beaten. Unfortunately, it was Christina Carling-Craft, and she was already dead. Her body showed signs of blows all over, and her nose was broken. There was also a strangulation mark around her neck. It was later discovered that Christina had been strangled with her own sweatpants. When the detectives identified the victim, they had to break the devastating news to Alex, who was waiting outside. His beloved Christina was dead. This shocking revelation sparked immediate suspicion, as the people closest to the victim are often implicated in such cases. The police did not dismiss the possibility that Alex might be the perpetrator. Alex and Christina had a long history together, and anything could have transpired between them. It was Alex who had contacted the police station, expressing concern for Christina's safety, only for her to be found dead soon after. These events seemed too coincidental. It was possible that Alex had orchestrated the scenario to divert suspicion away from himself. The investigators requested that Alex accompany them to the police station to answer some questions. He agreed without hesitation. During the questioning, Alex explained that he had an urgent work commitment in New York on August 21st and had planned to return. The following night, August 22nd, at 2:30 a.m., he called Christina to bid her good night, but she didn't answer. Given her habitual wakefulness at this hour, Alex grew anxious. He made several more calls, but Christina remained unresponsive. After reviewing the security system, he discovered suspicious activity in the apartment that night, prompting him to relinquish his business and rush back to Ardmore. After hearing Alex's story, the police no longer believed he was responsible for Christina's murder. His alibi checked out, and he couldn't have been in two places at once. They cleared him as a suspect, but the question remained: who killed Christina? Who would want her dead? The investigators looked into Christina's report of a robbery 4 days before her murder, suspecting a connection between the two crimes. This led them to Andre Melton, the thief who stole from Christina's apartment. Maybe he returned to steal again, but his plan was foiled when Christina caught him. Perhaps he discovered she had reported him to the police and decided to take revenge. On August 22nd, the day Christina's body was found, the police obtained an arrest warrant for Andre Melton. When they went to his address, however, they discovered he was no longer there. Despite his absence, they did find some of Christina's belongings still at the location. The police also managed to obtain surveillance footage from the night of the crime, which showed Christina leaving her apartment, then returning a few hours later with an unknown man. The footage was recorded at 3:08 a.m., and surprisingly, the man was not Andre Melton. Further analysis of the footage revealed that the unknown man did not leave Christina's apartment again. The police later found an explanation for this using CCTV cameras on the streets of Ardmore. They discovered that Christina had visited a Philadelphia bar before returning to her apartment. Investigators reviewed the CCTV footage from the bar, which showed Christina meeting a man who later hugged her. This was the same man she had returned to her apartment with. After leaving the bar, Christina and her new friend were involved in an altercation. In the days that followed, detectives worked to reconstruct Christina's movements on the day she died, gathering data to piece together the events leading up to the crime. The police quickly ruled out Melton as a suspect, as he was not with Christina on the day of her death. However, it remained unclear whether her death was connected to the earlier robbery or simply a coincidence. On August 25th, the police received a new lead. Andrew Sanford, the taxi driver who had driven Christina and her companion that night, came forward. According to Sanford, Christina and the man had hailed him down rather than using the taxi app and had negotiated the fare. Sanford reported that the couple seemed affectionate and did not arouse his suspicion. When they arrived at their destination, Christina got out and directed Sanford where to go. It turned out that she didn't have any cash and offered to leave her credit card, but Sanford declined. Her friend then offered him $100 to wait for 10 to 15 minutes while they went inside. Sanford left 20 minutes later, as neither Christina nor her companion had returned. The couple, Christina and Alex, entered their second-floor apartment around 3 a.m. About an hour later, at 4 a.m., Christina made a call to her cousin, but she didn't speak. Instead, her cousin heard a man's voice in the background, warning Christina not to call the police. The call abruptly ended before the cousin could gather more information. It remains unclear why the cousin didn't call 911 after hearing this. The police were able to piece together the crime's timeline thanks to the door sensors in the apartment, which recorded exact times for each door opening. The records showed that someone opened the door at 3:08 a.m. and again at 5:10 a.m. Around the same time, the system detected that someone had opened the sliding glass door on the balcony, which explained why the surveillance cameras didn't capture the moment when the man Christina met at the bar left. When the police arrived after Alex's call, they found Christina alone in the apartment, leading them to assume that the perpetrator had jumped off the balcony. Police sought public's help through media, releasing surveillance images of two men, Andre Melton and the one at Christina's apartment the night she died. In a surprising turn of events, Andre Melton, whose whereabouts was still unknown to the detectives, contacted the police himself. He confessed to stealing valuables from Christina, but vehemently denied any involvement in her murder. The police were perplexed by this unexpected call, as they were still unable to establish a definitive link between the theft and Christina's death. It was possible that this was all part of a strategy devised by the two suspects. It seemed that Melton's intention was not to surrender to the authorities, but to proclaim his innocence in Christina's murder. On August 26th, the police station received an anonymous call from a man who claimed to know one of the suspects featured in the released pictures. He shared a room with the suspect at a psychiatric clinic in Philadelphia. The caller revealed that the suspect had previously chased a woman in Love Park, Philadelphia, and followed her into the local family court building, where he molested her and became aggressive, shouting and causing destruction. The incident led to a 2-hour stay in a psychiatric hospital, costing $70. However, the suspect was admitted without being identified, as no one wanted to deal with him. The police were left with a mystery on their hands. The caller then provided even more critical information, stating that the suspect bragged about recently strangling a woman, taking great pleasure and satisfaction from the act. Upon hearing this, investigators strongly believed that they had found the killer of Christina Carlin Craft. The police station received another call from a man who claimed to be a relative of the suspect from Philadelphia. He identified the man in the photo as Jonathan Wesley Harris, who had previously served a prison sentence for robbery. Harris was released from prison on July 15th, just 5 weeks before Christina's death. After conducting a thorough background check, investigators concluded that Andre Melton and Jonathan Harris had no connection and had never crossed paths before. Therefore, the police ruled out any possibility of a link between the two crimes. Furthermore, the police gained access to Harris's phone records, which revealed that he had sent several messages on August 22nd. One of the texts mentioned that he had met an attractive woman and was planning to visit her apartment on August 28th. With this new evidence, the police obtained an arrest warrant for Jonathan Harris and deemed it crucial to apprehend him as soon as possible, as they were unsure of his next move. However, tracking Harris down proved to be a challenge, as he had left no trace. Investigators finally got a break when they contacted Harris's sister on August 29, 2018, and learned that he had recently purchased a bus ticket to Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, they discovered that Harris was already on the bus when they spoke with his sister. The police realized they wouldn't be able to catch up with him, leaving the Pittsburgh police as their last hope. It was essential to be in the right place at the right time to apprehend Harris. The police investigating Christina's death reached out to the Pittsburgh Law Enforcement Agency for assistance. They provided the exact time of the bus's arrival in Pittsburgh and sent over a photo of Harris. The fugitive task force then set up an ambush, blocking all potential escape routes, ready to apprehend the suspect at a moment's notice. Shortly after, one of the employees spotted the bus approaching. They allowed Harris time to calmly disembark, avoiding any sudden moves that might provoke a reaction. About 10 minutes later, a policeman intercepted him. I saw his eyes scanning, searching for an escape route, but it was too late. According to a Pittsburgh police officer, when the officer asked Harris to identify himself, he provided a false name. He was subsequently arrested and taken into custody at the police station. Detectives from Philadelphia traveled to Pittsburgh to question Harris. They requested that he recount the events of the night he met Christina. Harris claimed to have seen her on multiple occasions at bars and nightclubs in Philadelphia. Christina Carlin Craft was struggling to adjust to her new life in New York, which had drastically altered her daily routine and environment. As a result, she would frequently visit bars, cafes, and nightclubs, but she was always by herself since Alex was constantly working and she had not yet formed new friendships. It was common for men at these establishments to approach her, taking advantage of her solo status. Harris was one of those men. Harris claimed he was drunk and high on illegal drugs when he met Christina. They had a drink, then went to her place, where they drank more and had consensual sex. Harris demanded $1,200, but Christina refused, sparking a heated argument. Harris said she hit him with a wine bottle, so he hit her back, causing her to fall. When she tried to call the police, he strangled her with sweatpants until she passed out. Jonathan Harris's story had inconsistencies. A toxicology report on Christina's body found only alcohol, contradicting his claim of a single hit. When confronted, he admitted lying. Initially, Harris denied involvement, but later confessed to beating her, saying, "I panicked," and covering her because he didn't want to see her. When the trial began, Harris, despite having confessed to the crime, pleaded not guilty, like many other criminals who later retract their confessions. However, the investigators had assembled a substantial amount of evidence, making it difficult for Harris and his lawyer to build a strong defense. They anticipated a sentence of 22 to 40 years for third-degree murder and attempted to avoid a life sentence. Nevertheless, the prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence that convinced the court that the crime was premeditated. During the trial, the court heard testimony from a man who had shared a room with Harris at a psychiatric clinic. This same man had previously contacted the police. He revealed that Jonathan Harris had earlier confessed to him, stating, "There's nothing like squeezing somebody and feeling the last breath leave their body." In August 2019, Judge William R. Carpenter sentenced Jonathan Wesley Harris to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 22 to 45 years. The judge added the extra decades to ensure that Harris would never be freed, sending a message to future governors or pardon boards. In December 2018, Philadelphia police arrested Andre Melton for the robbery of Christina Carling-Craft's apartment. In March 2020, the court sentenced him to 1 to 4 years in prison, followed by 3 years of consecutive probation, which means Melton will be under court supervision for a total of 7 years. Before learning his fate, Melton said, "I would like to apologize to the family for any grief or pain that I caused. I am not the bad person the district attorney is trying to make me out to be." Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. A vengeful ex-partner's sudden return can be petrifying, with the possibility of violence looming. On a seemingly ordinary day, a couple's joyous outing turned tragic as gunshots rang out, leaving them lifeless on the ground. A few people were killed in a parking lot near the church. There was outrage and panic as parishioners heard gunshots, but did not see the full horror. Police arrived and examined the scene, finding 2 victims, a young married couple. We'll start by examining the lives of our heroes and delving into the details of the situation they found themselves in. We'll also discuss whether their tragic end could have been avoided. When lies, betrayal, greed, fear, and darkness become an integral part of someone's mindset, it drives them to commit unthinkable crimes. In fact, an entire family can be drawn into such crimes, causing the collapse of many lives. The brutal double murder of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. Nathan was a father who had moved closer to his daughter to be near her. However, he had to obtain official custody and legal visitation rights with the help of a lawyer during this difficult period. It was during this time that he met Crystal, a childhood friend. Crystal had dreamed of graduating from university, but instead got married and had a family with 4 children. When the marriage ended in divorce, Crystal and her children returned to their hometown. Nathan and Crystal met at a time that was ideal for both of them. Nathan was drawn to Crystal's children and her positive outlook. They got married in 2013. with Nathan working in a warehouse and Crystal starting a thriving clothing and jewelry business. The family prospered, and they were able to hire a lawyer to assist Nathan in obtaining visitation rights with his daughter from a previous relationship. The daughter, Madison, was excited about her father's new wife and siblings. However, Madison's maternal grandparents, Lita and Paula Westfall, were resentful and worried about losing their only grandchild. In 2012, Kristen Westfall, Madison's mother, had applied for full custody with the support of her parents. The custody battle continued for 2 years, but Crystal's arrival in Nathan's life altered the entire situation. The judge granted Nathan visitation rights in October 2013. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal arrived at a church service, planning to take their 6-year-old daughter Madison for a walk afterwards to retrieve pre-prepared gifts. As they left the church, they were shot and killed in a brutal execution-style attack. The investigation revealed that Nathan had been shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle and also in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun, suggesting the involvement of 2 shooters. The investigators were surprised by the reaction of Nathan's ex-wife's family, the Westfalls, who seemed to be overly dramatizing the tragedy while concealing their satisfaction over the deaths that had occurred. Paul Westfall even went into a seizure, seemingly unable to accept the news of Nathan's death. A grown man who had spent years trying to remove Nathan's influence from his daughter's life was so distraught that he had a seizure. Kristen was the first person interviewed, and her interview came across as a little unsettling. She was the only member of the family who maintained a very composed and natural demeanor, despite the fact that she and Nathan had been together for a long time and had a child together. Kristen continued to provide some rather peculiar details about him, seemingly trying to emphasize only the negative aspects of her ex-husband. She reported that she knew who killed him in Montana. Nathan was listed in dangerous motorcycle gangs, and one day, one of the gang members showed up at Nathan's mother's house and threatened to kill him. This story checked out, but it remained an empty threat because of an accidentally broken motorcycle, and the gang itself turned out to be a common exaggeration to confuse the investigation. As an alibi, Kristen said that on the day of the crime, she was at the grocery store with her father Paul, a couple of miles from the church, after which they both went home. Surveillance footage at 10:57 a.m. confirmed their presence at the grocery store. Paul Westfall told the exact same story, but Paul was a hunter and had a firearm in his arsenal, so his hands were tested for traces of gunpowder, but the result was negative. However, until now, his reaction to the death of Nathan, whom he sincerely hated and never hid, seemed to the investigators very strange, and played it left a sliver of doubt in his sincerity. Interviews with loved ones over a short period of time helped investigators discover that Nathan Maddox was involved in a custody battle over his daughter with his ex-wife Kristen Westfall and her family. After a long and bitter dispute in court, he was close to retaining custody, something that none of the Westfall family members strongly wanted. Such a desperate battle between the parties may well have been cause for reprisal, but the police had no concrete evidence to arrest any member of the Westfall family. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 people were the shooters. Investigators had yet to be convinced of their story and figure out which family member pulled the trigger, taking the lives of 2 people, or whether a hired killer did it. The researchers took a different approach and decided to act through the main protagonist of the controversy, little Madison Maddox. After all, her safety was at stake since she was still with a family that could pose a threat to her. The police, along with Child Protective Services, CPS, went to remove the child from the home, but they faced a wave of protests and outrage. The behavior of the older Westfall family entailed a search of the home. What the police later found in the house shocked them. A gun was stored on a shelf in an easily accessible place in the room, and the culmination of the search was the illegal drugs scattered around the house. It turns out that in 2013, Kristen Westfall was charged and arrested for possession of a controlled substance. The arrests were repeated, which clearly indicated that Kristen couldn't be a good mother to Madison. When Kristen went to jail in early 2013, her parents were granted temporary custody of their daughter and would not allow Nathan to see her while their granddaughter was in their custody. However, despite Child Protective Services prohibitions, Kristen continued to live in the house with her young daughter in the same room and slept in the same bed with her, even in 2014, with the injunctions in place. After a search of the Westfalls' home, where a used syringe with residue of illegal substances was found on a dresser and a gun on the nightstand next to Kristen's bed, little Madison was taken into temporary custody, and additional evidence found led to the Westfalls' arrest. State authorities wanted the girl placed in foster care and said they found supplies for illegal drugs in the Westfalls' home, as well as a gun on a nightstand within easy reach of the girl. Child Protective Services was involved in the Madison Maddox custody case in March 2014, less than 2 months after the tragic murder outside the church. Authorities made 4 arrests. Kristen Westfall, 29, her younger brother Cameron, and her parents, Paul and Lita Westfall, were arrested. There was no direct evidence of their guilt in the Maddox murder, and cross-examinations didn't produce the desired result either. The police used some deceptive tactics to put pressure on the most vulnerable member of the Westfall family, 18-year-old Cameron. He was told that if found guilty, all his family members would be sentenced to life in prison, while the direct perpetrators would face the death penalty. Cameron, being young and compassionate, became very afraid and quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, disclosing all the details of the incident. The crime against the young couple, the Maddoxes, turned out to be a carefully pre-planned attack by the Westfall family gang. Their motive was to permanently exclude Nathan from the role of father. Shortly after the shooting incident, it was revealed that Nathan and his ex-wife, Kristen, had been engaged in a nasty custody dispute over their 5-year-old daughter Madison, with Kristen's family supporting her. The prolonged and expensive legal battle was expected to end favorably for Nathan. However, the Westfalls were concerned about this outcome and meticulously plotted a scheme to remove him from Madison's life. Nathan wanted to take care of his daughter, alone, but the Westfalls were not interested in letting her go, even to see her father, let alone give him the girl permanently. The Westfalls were very hurt by the fact that the former son-in-law had settled down in life and was living a good life. Thus, when the judge allowed him multiple visitations, it became obvious that he could win the trial, which led Kristen to come up with an original idea to get rid of him once and for all. Kristen initially attempted to find someone to kill her ex-husband, but when that plan failed, she and her father decided to take matters into their own hands. On a typical Sunday, the family attended church, and January 18th was no different. Lita Westfall, accompanied by young Madison, arrived at the scheduled service time. Afterward, Lita had to hand the girl over to her father. Meanwhile, Kristen and Paul went to a remote store, where they posed as customers to be captured on CCTV cameras, aiming to establish a solid alibi. However, they misjudged the timing. Each family member had their own responsible role to play for the entire interval. They communicated by text message, updating each other on the Maddox's movements. Lita, who had attended the service, informed Paul as Nathan and Crystal prepared to leave the church. She also called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron took an active role in concealing the evidence. He discarded the gun used after his sister and father shot the newlyweds in the head near a remote church. He drove to a lake where he discarded the bag of weapons. Cameron soon agreed to cooperate with authorities and revealed that Kristen originally came up with the idea, and the family went along. He also pointed out to investigators the location where he had discarded the murder weapons, which divers later retrieved, confirming Cameron's words. the police detained 29-year-old Kristen, her brother Cameron, and her parents Paul and Letha Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Thus, Kristen and Paul pulled the trigger, with Cameron and Letha acting as willing accomplices. Given that Letha was at the church at the time of the incident, it was obvious that she was not responsible for the shots that killed Nathan and Crystal Maddox. However, phone records showed that she was responsible for informing her daughter and spouse of the couple's whereabouts as they left the church, while Kristen and Paul were the ones who fired the bullets. Letha and her son Cameron participated in the crime intentionally. The trial was very loud and lengthy, with each member of the Westfall family tried separately. Paul Westfall continued to exhibit seizure-like behavior, so he was found mentally unfit and remained in a state psychiatric hospital for evaluation. In May 2014, a judge found Paul incompetent, but that verdict was overturned 4 months later. With Paul and Letha facing the death penalty for the murders of Nathan and Crystal Maddox, they had little choice but to agree to a plea bargain with the district attorney's office to avoid the death penalty. Paul pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Letha also pleaded guilty to participating in organized criminal activity instead of going to trial. Letha will not be eligible for parole until 2046 and is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, but will be eligible for parole in 2044. Kristen is the third member of the Westfall family to stand trial in this case. Throughout the entire court hearing, Kristen pleaded not guilty to all the accusations against her, stating that her whole family was crazy and she was the only one who was sincere about it. When her entire family, Letha, Paul, PA, and Cameron, came to the trial and testified against her, she couldn't say anything to their faces. In August 2016, the final trial and sentencing for Kristen Westfall began. The motive for killing Nathan and Crystal Maddox was the custody of their daughter, Madison Maddox. Kristen adamantly did not want Nathan to see Maddie whenever he wanted, as she wanted to control her daughter and father's communication herself and through the child. The trial took over a week, and with overwhelming evidence against her, the jury found her guilty of capital murder. After 8 hours of deliberation, Kristen Westfall was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, nearly 9 months before her father pleaded guilty and received an identical sentence in May 2017. Kristen Westfall is currently incarcerated at the William Hobby Women's Prison in Falls County, Texas. While Paul, Letha, and Kristen Westfall were ultimately charged with 2 counts of murder, officials only charged the youngest member of the family, Cameron, with 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Cameron Westfall pleaded guilty to 2 counts of third-degree tampering with evidence, and the judge deferred sentencing contingent upon Cameron testifying against his family. Cameron faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. It was reported that he had nothing to do with the actual shooting and that his mother was also not involved because she was at the church when the crime occurred. However, phone records show that she texted her husband and daughter as the Maddoxes were preparing to go home. Currently, Cameron is incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Huntsville, Texas, where he is expected to remain until his expected release date in 2025. Cameron was very indifferent to the crime and claimed he had nothing to do with it. But the investigation didn't rule out the possibility that he knew more than he was saying, as he lived in the house with his family and couldn't have not heard about Kristen and Paul's plans to kill the Maddox family. Her entire family, her brother Cameron and her parents Lloyd Paul and Letha Westfall, were involved in the crime. This case was complicated as the community demanded justice. Lloyd Paul, Letha, and Cameron Westfall made a deal with the investigation after agreeing to testify against the sister. Cameron took a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison, and his mother received a life sentence the following year. A judge also sentenced Lloyd Paul to life in prison. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to first-degree murder under the plea agreement and would not be able to appeal the sentence. The crime family's protagonist, Kristen Westphal, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole in a fateful decision. The victim's daughter, Madison Maddox, lost her father and will likely never see the grandparents who cared for her and perhaps even loved her. After the Westphal family was sentenced, the legal battle for custody of Madison Maddox continues. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, has since filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. The people in the town were devout, went to church, and they also easily killed people, covering themselves with concern for the girl. The older generation of Westphal fulfilled the wish of their daughter and helped to commit this terrible crime. Nathan was not a bad or mean person. He loved his own daughter and strove to be a good father to her. Obviously, in addition to the custody battle, the hatred associated with the fact that the girl's father had created a new family and was able to pick up his mind and start a new life without crime comes first, and was perfectly happy with the new woman, having something he didn't have in his past relationship with Kristen. That's what was causing all the negativity from the ex-wife, and she was able to turn her entire family against him. If it was just about custody, they wouldn't have killed Nathan's new woman. After all, the Madison custody dispute started before Nathan and Crystal's relationship. There is certainly only one loser in the history of the Westphal versus Maddox fight. Of course, it's Madison. I'd like to believe that when she grows up, she won't remember the wild selfishness with which adults tried to take advantage of her by saying words about love. After all, if the family had loved the child, they would have tried to build a normal relationship for her sake, but they were only acting to please their own egos. Jordan chased Zara for about half a mile with a shadow of persistence and evil. Zara, unaware of the danger, continued on her way, without suspecting that evil was already approaching. Suddenly, he appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, grabbed her by the neck with one hand, and covered her mouth with the other so that the girl would not scream. He blocked her breathing, and then dragged her into the thicket of the forest, where darkness and inhumanity awaited the victim. There, in a forgotten corner of the world, hell descended on Zara. He forcibly invaded her body, her soul, leaving only a scream of pain and horror that was lost in the darkness of the night. Despite her desperate attempts to resist, her cries remained unanswered in the ruthless void. This whole nightmare, this terrible aggression lasted for 9 whole minutes, which seemed like an eternity for Zara, who felt fear and hopelessness. Then, as if nothing had happened, Jordan walked back to his house, leaving behind only traces of destruction and an absolute nightmare. But what if all this was just the beginning of an even more eerie and mysterious story? What if the hidden truth about what happened that terrible night turned out to be more confusing and dark than it seemed at first glance? Secrets hidden in the shadows of the past can destroy not only lives, but also destroy all that remains of hope and peace in this world. Only by digging deeper one can find the answers, but there are even more questions hiding behind them. In the winter of 1986, Zara Alina was born in the vast landscapes of Great Britain. She was the first of 5 children of a single mother, a young woman who mysteriously moved her life from the Pakistani slums to this corner of the UK back in 1968. Zara embodied the hopes and dreams of her parents, and her birth was an important event. She was the first granddaughter of Radha Parvin, and it brought her a special status in her community. From early childhood, Zara was surrounded by relatives who raised her to a pedestal, showering her with tenderness and care. She grew up surrounded by numerous generations, studying at a unique school of life where the rules were written in blood and betrayal. Despite their lack of finances, Zara's parents invested everything in their daughter's education, believing that she would be able to find everything she needed for a successful life. Their dreams were strong, their hopes were stronger, But in this world of dark streets and hidden ambitions, Zara's life was in danger, hanging over her like a dark cloud. From early childhood, the fire of passion and hunger for life burned in Zara's heart. She dived into the world of tap dancing, where every movement, like a note in a symphony of passion, gave birth to beauty and harmony. Swimming was another passion of her soul, allowing her to escape from the gray everyday life and feel the wave of freedom. She always dressed exquisitely, as if creating a work of art from herself, embodying her dreams in every outfit. But that was just the beginning. When she skated for the first time, she felt new breath of freedom in her soul. Skating became not just a hobby for her, but a way of breathing, a way of expressing the deepest essence of her soul. Among those who knew Zara, no one was surprised to hear that she dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Her heart was full of desire to protect and help others because she was that bright ray of hope in a world full of evil. Her friendly nature sparkled with joy which was contagious, like a fire in the dark. Her gaze and sparkling eyes promised miracles, and her black curly hair seemed to have been created to tempt fate. Her image was full of charm, like a magic potion mixing passion, kindness, and courage in an extraordinary cocktail of attractiveness. Already in her teens, she had the opportunity to travel around England and visit museums and galleries. She showed big interest in art and culture. These trips became an indicator of how independent she was. Later, trips to the rest of Europe followed. This was a clear confirmation that she inherited the desire for adventure from her relatives. It seems she was following in the footsteps of her Aunt Farah, who, unlike the rest of the family, chose Portugal over the UK. It was fascinating for a young woman to see the work of her aunt, who worked as a psychotherapist in women's organizations. Zara visited her several times. After graduating from high school, her aspirations began to be realized when she got in the University of Westminster. Since then, she worked hard to achieve her goals while taking care of her mother and grandmother at the same time. Her tiny figure was full of a passionate soul and unstoppable energy. Her sense of justice and equality was not limited to the walls of the lecture hall. On the contrary, the generous and caring Zara supported refugees fleeing violence and sought to give a voice to those who had less power. She also participated in volunteer work in community canteens to help the homeless. In general, she had a special habit of noticing the needs of others and always including them in her schedule. Zara was an easygoing girl. Her Aunt Smira Naz lived nearby, and she often visited her several times a week. While preparing for the exams, she asked her aunt to help her to study, but they always ended up laughing. Zara left a trail of joy behind her everywhere she went, as those who knew her at that time claimed. In addition, she was hardworking, covered all her expenses, and helped her family. She worked at a local clothing store and knew everyone in the area, from teenagers to the elderly. She always greeted everyone with kindness and was willing to help if necessary. The young girl could talk for hours, but it did not affect her ability to listen carefully to others. Her generosity extended to all living creatures, and she especially loved cats. Sometimes she spent her own money to take stray cats to the vet, take care of them at home, or persuade neighbors to take them in. Her friend Sanji Naira described her as radiant, and believed that her main gift was the ability to share optimism. When Sanji was in a bad mood, he turned to her for help. In Zara's life there was a bright star whose name was engraved in the very depths of her heart, Carissa Peters. They were not just friends, but companions in the struggle for justice, for protection of women from violence and abuse. Their shared hobbies, especially in the field of women's rights, and it was the connecting thread that carried their friendship through difficulties and trials. Zara and Carissa were so close that they seemed to share the same soul. They easily entered each other's house, as if they were their own shelters from the storms of the world, or talked on the phone almost every day, discussing the news, their thoughts and plans for the future. In 2002, after successfully passing the exams and completing her internship in law field, Zara had the opportunity to work in the Crown Prosecution Service. It was an important step, and an integral part of her dream to become a full-fledged lawyer. To do this, she worked tirelessly, even when her studies were interrupted by worries about her mother and grandmother, as well as financial difficulties. This step was important not only for her, but also for Carissa and for those who believed in her, who support her on this stormy journey to a bright future. On her first day at her new job, Zara couldn't help but be happy. She sent a smiley selfie to her friends and family, as if announcing to the whole world her new era of life. It wasn't just a new job, it was the last piece in the mosaic of her dreams. She had been coming to this for so long that she could hardly believe in her own happiness. Working as an administrator might seem a secondary post, but for Zara, it was a giant step towards her goal. At the age of 35, she realized that a new stage in her life was beginning, and this made her heart beat with extraordinary force. It wasn't just a working day, it was the beginning of a new era, an era when she felt fulfilled and happy. The new job strengthened her confidence in the fact that it was time to create her own family. She dreamed of her children, how they would be happy and protected, how they would live in a world filled with love and harmony. At that moment, Zara realized that every new day was a step towards her happiness, a step towards her dream of having her own family. With such an active life between work, volunteering, friends, and the attentive care of her mother and grandmother, with whom she lived in a separate room when necessary, Zara loved to walk. She liked to move freely. She didn't bother with small things. She could easily put a pair of shoes in her bag to change them for sneakers when needed. Zara believed that a woman should be able to move freely without any obstacles, and even more so that no one should have deprived them of this right. But near her house, there was a man whose existence completely took away this woman's right. His name was Jordan McSweeney. He was a few years younger than Zara, and it was unknown where he was from. One Saturday evening, when the sun had already set below the horizon, Zara was going to meet a friend. Even though she was not in the mood, she decided not to cancel the meeting. Zara's word was as strong as steel, and she always stuck to her promises, not allowing her mood to dictate her actions. Her devotion was as steady as a rock, and she was ready to walk through thick and thin for the sake of her friends. Before leaving, Zara picked up the phone to talk to Aunt Farah. But this time there was a certain anxiety in her voice that did not go unnoticed. Her aunt asked her to be careful, and Zara realized that even if she wasn't going to go far from home, the world around her seemed strange and unpredictable that evening. But she stubbornly told herself that she knew every dark corner of the city, and her name was known to everyone who had ever looked at her. But something about this evening made her heart beat faster, and Zara decided to be more careful. At the appointed time, she met her friend at a local bar called the Ilford Big Spoon, located on the West End of London. Ilford is a lively and diverse London area, an ideal place for dinner and gatherings, so the girls visited this place that Saturday evening. Then they went to another bar, and there Zara drank a couple glasses of water. At the same time, Jordan was having one drink after another at another nearby nightclub. An idea was forming in his mind, and he refused to resist it. He intended to find a woman to attack that evening. Surveillance cameras recorded how Jordan met women at the entrance to the club, hugged them without their consent, and tried to kiss them. He was particularly persistent with one of the employees, despite her obvious reluctance. He was kicked out of the club a little after 23 o'clock, and his inappropriate behavior remained recorded on cameras. When he came out, his actions were recorded by cameras as he walked along Romford Street towards the park. Seeing the woman walking, Jordan followed her and approached her closely. Although she tried to avoid him by entering the store, he was waiting for her outside. When the woman cautiously left, Jordan followed her again. Then he walked down the other side of the street, leaving her in sight. However, when the woman entered her house, Jordan had no choice but to continue on his way. According to the surveillance cameras data, at about 2 a.m. on Cranbrook Street, Jordan noticed a woman approaching him. Suddenly he quickened his pace, approaching her. But on the video you can see that two passing witnesses noticed Jordan's strange actions. Despite the man's suspicious behavior, the woman returned home safely, leaving Jordan surprised and annoyed. He returned to Cranbrook Street without success. At this time, Zara and her friend, deciding to return home, left the bar when it was 2 a.m. A friend took a taxi, preferring convenience, while Zara, given the short distance and good weather, decided to walk. They parted, and Zara headed down the residential street of Cranbrook, which is a 10-minute walk from her house. That's when Jordan noticed her. According to the Chief Inspector Dave Williams, Jordan had a clear intention. He was going to attack a woman that night, regardless of the location. Cranbrook Street remained busy even in the early morning hours. There was a constant flow of traffic. At the age of 13, Jordan had already been sentenced in Kent Juvenile Court for various offenses committed between 2006 and 2009. In August 2010, when he was 17 years old, he was found guilty of assaulting a girl, leaving her with a swollen eye, and he was given a 4-month detention and correction period. 11 years later, he attacked another woman, and he was again banned from approaching a woman, this time for 3 years. During this time, he had no right to contact her directly or indirectly. By 2010, Jordan had 28 convictions for 69 crimes, including theft, assaults on police and the public, criminal cases, theft of motor vehicles, traffic violations, committing crimes with bail, and shoplifting. On his page on a well-known social network, he bragged about having a huge collection of weapons, and in general, extolled a criminal lifestyle to the sky, posting different photos and quotes. He also posted fake pictures saying that the FBI was looking for him. On June 17, 2022, he was released on parole after being sentenced to prison for criminal damage, racially aggravated harassment, and illegal carrying of a bladed weapon. One of the conditions was meetings with a parole officer. Jordan settled into a van on St. Valentine Street, in a 130 acres park in the south of Gun Hill, the largest green space in London's Redbridge district. He again violated all agreements, and true to his criminal background, missed not 1, but 2 meetings with a parole officer. As a result, the authorities refused to give him the advantage. The parole service began the procedure for returning him to prison on June 22, 2022, but they did not immediately inform the police, but only 2 days later. Early on Saturday morning, June 25th, police visited Jordan's mother's house to arrest him and found an unpleasant surprise. He was not there. Around 2:30 a.m. on June 26, 2022, the streets of Ilford witnessed a terrible crime. Zara was found on the sidewalk with signs of abuse on her body. Her belongings were scattered, as if the mess in her life was embodied in the streets. Her body was bruised, her clothes were torn, and her eyes showed struggle for survival. A woman passing by immediately realized that the situation was extremely serious. Without hesitation, she began to give Zara a closed chest massage and do CPR, trying to give her the last hope of survival. But the injuries inflicted on her body turned out to be too serious. Even with all the help of passers-by and emergency medical help, it was too late. Zara fought for her life, but the severe wounds and brutality of the crime were too strong. At 9:58 a.m. on Sunday, she passed away, leaving only the painful traces of a struggle behind. At that time, at about 11 a.m. in the park, Jordan, recorded by security cameras, was getting rid of evidence, throwing out his clothes. With his indifferent and cold-blooded demeanor, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. The police responded quickly and knocked on Zara's grandmother's door, asking her to identify her granddaughter from the bar's video footage. When she confirmed that it was her, the police finally explained to her what had happened. Zara's uncle, Kasim Alina, called the rest of the family, including Aunt Farah, to tell them what had happened. In Portugal, her aunt, crying, remembered the call on Saturday night. After she broke the news to her children, Farah immediately flew to London. The family was in shock, trembling with horror. It was difficult for all of them to eat, sleep, or talk. Although they hardly dared to mention Zara's death, they also could not think of anything else. Meanwhile, detectives immediately began investigating the area where Zara was found. One of the first steps was to collect video footage from surveillance cameras to track the attacker's movements. This, along with the bloody fingerprints left near the scene, allowed them to identify Jordan. They then tracked his location using a video surveillance system. After receiving images of the main suspect, Inspector Dave sent an officer to Gun Hill to check if anyone else recognized Jordan. The operation was successful, and almost immediately they found Jordan sleeping in his van. The authorities immediately arrested him. Confused and stunned, Jordan had no resistance during the arrest. Clothes and shoes stained with blood were found in his trailer, which Jordan was trying to get rid of. Despite many hours of interrogation, Jordan remained silent, refusing to reveal his name or give details of his life. At the same time, new video footage continued to appear, allowing police to reconstruct the chronology of events. The crime led parole officer Justin Russell to highlight a number of errors in the treatment of Jordan. It was noted that Jordan had been a criminal since the age of 16, both in and out of prison, which made him a high-risk criminal. He had been a high-risk criminal since the age of 16, but it turned out that he had not been treated appropriately. They should have taken more urgent measures to return him to prison after he missed scheduled supervision appointments upon release from detention. But they didn't do it. On Wednesday, June 29th, through a press release read by the police, Zara's family expressed how shocking the last few days have been. Logically, for them, it was an irreparable loss. Nevertheless, they stressed that the warmth and kindness shown by people were valuable to them and served as evidence of the strength of their beloved Zara's spirit. The family had a lot to do, and they needed to find strength. Aunt Farah communicated with the media and met with the police. Despite the shock and grief, her family, especially her aunt, taking into account her own experience in this field, knew that it was necessary to control the situation and protect Zara from accusations from certain media. On July 1st, 2022, a preliminary hearing was held in the Jordan case, and on September 30th of the same year, a date was set for a hearing to prepare testimony in the trial. However, on the day of the scheduled trial, Jordan did not show up due to a positive test for COVID-19, and the hearing had to be postponed. On Saturday, July 2nd, a memorial service was held in memory of Zara, organized by her family, which took place on the way to her home, symbolizing the last journey that never ended. At this service, many of those present were dressed in white, symbolizing a silent walk. The event was attended by a coalition of more than 120 organizations specializing in supporting women, expressing solidarity in the fight against violence. It was one of the many groups that worked with Zara Alina's family. As they stated in the media, they demanded justice and taking responsibility. Additionally, they asked to focus on what they considered a priority and key issue, to resist violence from men and to stop the acts of violators. At a preliminary hearing before the investigation at the East London court in Walthamstow, crime scene investigator Nadia Persut said she believes there is reason that local police officers could and should have taken more action to find Jordan before his attack on Zara. Consequently, she expressed the opinion that juries should resolve this issue. In addition, this investigation should have included the actions of the staff of corrections facilities for probationers. According to Nadia, this process was supposed to last a month. On November 16, 2022, Jordan also did not appear at the hearing, despite being told that this was mandatory. Thus, the meeting was organized via video call. This time, he pleaded guilty. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow then described him as extremely unfit candidate for bail. This opinion was also supported by Judge Chima Grove. As for the verdict, the judge postponed it until December 14th of the same year. Approaching this date, Jordan again refused to appear in court. But even this did not prevent Jordan from being sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 33 years in prison for the murder of Zara Alina. The accused and his representatives filed an appeal, and the sentence was reduced to 33 years in prison. The judge stated that the fact that Zara was unconscious, did not feel anything, and did not suffer, reduced his sentence. Just 4 months later, it became known that Jordan had an intimate relationship with a woman who worked at the Belmar Correctional Service in South London, but was not a direct employee of the prison services. The Metropolitan Police later announced that a 32-year-old woman, whose identity was not disclosed, had been arrested and was under investigation on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. As for Zara Alina's family, everyone remembers Zara with love and pride. They still miss her. For her part, Aunt Farah continues to speak out against violence against women and girls. In March 2023, she joined a march organized by various groups seeking to draw attention to the issue and raise awareness. The protesters marched through the commercial district of West London to Trafalgar Square. Among various slogans, they stated that the lack of action against male violence is equal to abuse by the state. The events discussed in this video took place in 2007 in the state of Kansas, and although 16 years have passed since then, this high-profile case has yet to come to a conclusion. On January 5, 2007, 19-year-old Jody Sanderholm, who lived with her parents in Arkansas City, went to a dance rehearsal that was held at the college where she was attending. On that day, Jody did not return home and stopped answering her phone. Such behavior was unusual for her, so her parents immediately became concerned and decided to file a missing persons report with the police. Jody Leanne Sanderholm was born September 26, 1987 in Arkansas City to Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. She was the third child of her parents. She had a brother called Jason and a sister called Jennifer. From a young age, Jody was fond of dancing, and although it played a large role in Jody's life, she also did not neglect her studies. She was one of 4 valedictorians in her graduating class. While in high school, Jody was a member of the National Honor Society, a Kansas State Scholar, a Kansas Board of Regents Scholar, and earned the Outstanding Physics Student of the Year award presented by David Steinemetzy. She was a member of the Ark City High School dance team for 4 years. 2 of those 4 years, she was the captain. Jody was a member instructor of Ark City Dance and a Universal Dance Association instructor. After high school, she attended Cowley College where she studied pre-pharmacy. While at Cowley, she was a member of the Cowley Tigerette dance line. In 2007, the population of Arkansas City was about 12,000. Jody's parents, like probably other locals, thought it was a good and relatively safe place to live and raise children. However, after Jody disappeared and the details of what happened to her became known, many began to realize that safety was only an illusion and that the man was the most dangerous beast. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jody drove her car, a Dodge Stratus, to college for a dance rehearsal that was scheduled to end at 10:45. After the rehearsal, she intended to return home. Cindy called her daughter's cell phone several times, but she didn't answer, which was highly unusual. Jody always kept in touch with her family, and even if she missed a call, she would call back soon. Cindy had a bad feeling about this. She decided to get off work and go home to see if Jody was all right. When she arrived, she immediately noticed that her daughter's car was not in front of the house, and this only increased her anxiety, because Cindy knew that by this time, Jody should have been back from rehearsal. Upon entering the house and looking around, Cindy realized that Jody had not returned home. Her dance uniform, which she put in the washing machine when she returned from rehearsal, was not there or in the hamper for her dirty clothes. The shower stall was dry, although Jody always showered after dance class. It soon became clear that Jody had no contact with her father or older sister Jennifer either. She had an appointment at noon, to which she never showed up. Cindy and Brian began calling their daughter's friends, hoping to find out where she might be. But after the morning rehearsal ended and Jody left college, none of her friends saw her. That evening, the college dance team was scheduled to perform at a basketball game, with a routine of which Jody was the choreographer. She wouldn't have missed it of her own free will, but she didn't show up either. At about 6 p.m., still unable to learn anything and without waiting for their daughter to return home, Cindy and Brian contacted the police and reported her missing. Officers from the sheriff's office immediately put together flyers depicting and describing Jody, began to inquire about her last known whereabouts, and put out an APB on the vehicle she was traveling in. The police learned from Cindy and Brian that Jody had a boyfriend she had been dating since high school. His name was Colby Wilson. When contacted by phone, he reported that he had been at his brother's house in Texas for several days. The police quickly ruled him out as a potential suspect because his stay in another state was confirmed. The next day, January 6th, was very eventful. Lori Leglighter, Jody's best friend with whom they had been friends and danced since high school, provided the police with important information. They both enrolled at Cowley College, where they went on to study dance. Lori reported that she left work at Sirloin Stockade in Arkansas City around 10 p.m. Tuesday, January 2nd, and noticed a light blue car drive by the restaurant several times as she left. On her way home, she noticed a car following her in her rearview mirror. "I thought something strange was going on," Lori told the detectives. She decided to see if the car behind her was really following her, so she started turning onto different streets. The driver of the car behind her was doing the same thing, and it really scared Lori. She drove to the local police station and parked next to it, thinking that the stalker would leave her alone. She didn't see him after she stopped, so she drove home again. However, she had to go back to the parking lot near the police station because she saw the car chasing her again. Lori sat in the car for a while before driving home. She told the detectives that she didn't go to the station because she thought it was someone else's stupid prank, but that wasn't really all. On Friday, January 5th, the band Tigerette Dance Line was rehearsing at the college. According to Lori, she and Jody got there around the same time and, as usual, parked not far from each other. Lori spotted the light blue car again. What's more, she recognized the man behind the wheel. It was a local resident, 23-year-old Justin Thurber. Lori did not know him personally, but had seen him several times in the company of his older brother and his friends. Lori and Jody left practice at the same time and were supposed to meet up later, but Jody never showed up for that meeting. Soon, several members of the dance team revealed that they too had seen Justin near the college during the past week. He always sat in his car in the parking lot and just watched. Within the first 24 hours of Jody's disappearance, police had driven all over the city, but could not find her car. Arkansas City is surrounded by fields and wooded areas. They brought in a fixed-wing aircraft to search the area from the air. The car was more difficult to hide than a person because of its size, so the police hoped to be able to see Jody's car from the air. It was determined that the last time her cell phone signal was received, it was from a cell tower located near the Caw Wildlife Area. This is a vast, wooded area along the Arkansas River. At this point in the investigation, only one person, Justin Eugene Thurber, who was identified by Lori Leglighter and other members of the dance group, was considered as a person who might be involved in the disappearance of Jody Sanderholm. It is important to note here that despite his young age, Thurber was well known to the police. 3 years earlier, in 2004, he had been charged with illegal possession of banned substances. He eventually received a suspended sentence and was released. 3 months after that, he was arrested for theft and probation violation. In October 2005, he was charged with disorderly conduct. 3 months later, he was arrested for petty theft and again found to be in possession of a controlled substance. On December 31st, 2006, which was just 6 days before Jody disappeared, Thurber was arrested again for theft. That same day, after paying a $3,000 bail, he was free. Having had a merry New Year's Eve, the next day, January 1st, he began impersonating a police officer and disrupting public order. When the real cops came for him, Thurber complained of chest pain and was taken to the hospital instead of the station. Why he was not arrested after his discharge from the hospital remains unclear, nor is it quite clear why he managed to get away with it all the time. A relative of his who works for the Cowley County Police may have contributed to this, but that's only a guess. That same day, January 6th, a police officer saw Thurber's car, a light blue Cadillac, parked outside his parents' house and decided to talk to him. His father invited the officer into the house. When the police officer asked Justin where he had been yesterday, he said he had driven his car to Winfield, a town about 13 miles outside of Arkansas City, in the morning. There, according to Justin, he met up with his friend and 2 of his friend's buddies, whom he did not personally know very well. Next, the 4 of them began driving around the countryside in a car belonging to one of his friend's buddies, until the car got stuck on a dirt road near Cedar Vale. Then, as Thurber claimed, he walked toward Arkansas City, which is about 30 miles from Cedar Vale. After 6 hours, he got tired of walking and called his father to pick him up. Thurber's father confirmed what he said, saying he picked Justin up wet and dirty, a couple of miles from Cowley State Fishing Lake. Justin also told the police officer that his car, which he left in Winfield, had been returned by friends. The story wasn't very convincing, but there was nothing to charge Thurber with yet, so the officer left. That same evening, officers spoke with Alexis Swartzel, who recently ended a 3-year relationship with Thurber. She told officers Thurber often took her to the Kaw Wildlife Area, southeast of Arkansas City, and she pointed out places she and Thurber would visit. When the police informed Alexis that they were investigating the disappearance of Jody Sanderholm, she was very surprised and said that Justin had once said that he had begun watching Jody when he was 13 years old. He would peep at her when she was swimming in the pool in her backyard, and sometimes in the evenings, peek through the window in her room and wait for her to start changing clothes. Police asked Alexis about her reasons for breaking up with Thurber, to which she said she had broken up with him because he was too abusive and had strange tendencies that were becoming more and more frequent. On several occasions, she said, during intimacy, he would choke her unconscious. On top of that, he asked her to fight him because he could not get aroused any other way. It was becoming more and more obvious to the police by the minute that Justin Thurber might be involved in Jody's disappearance. The police had no evidence to link him to the girl's disappearance. But late in the evening of January 6th, Thurber was arrested anyway. Detective Eric Mata arrested Thurber on bail revocation and suspicion of criminal trespass because the investigation into Jody Sanderholm's disappearance revealed that Thurber was on the college campus, where the detective believed Thurber should not be. Thurber told Mata that he wanted to talk to his lawyer. At the same time, police officers arrived at Justin's parents' house with a search warrant. The officers took the shoes Justin had been wearing the day before when his father picked him up. The shoes were wet and were drying on a towel. Thurber's father told police he helped his son clean the mud off the shoes. The clothes Justin was wearing when his father picked him up were also recovered, but by this time he had had time to wash them. The next day, January 7th, searchers trained to identify human activity in rugged terrain set to work in the Kaw Wildlife Area. They found shoe prints that matched Justin Thurber's, as well as several other smaller shoe prints. As darkness fell, they decided to continue the search the next day. On the way home, some searchers drove past Cowley County State Fishing Lake and decided to stop because they heard Thurber was wet when his father picked him up. They discovered a muddy tire track, muddy shoe prints near a public restroom, mail addressed to Jody Sanderholm's parents in a chemical toilet, dance shoes in another toilet, and a flip-flop sandal. Investigators later retrieved cut-off sweatshorts, a wallet containing Jody Sanderholm's driver's license and social security card, her black leotard, a tigerette jacket with Jody Sanderholm's first name on the front, a vehicle floor mat, and a car seat cushion. The sandal matched the impressions found at the Kaw Wildlife Area. Searchers spent the next 2 days around Cowley County State Fishing Lake and the Kaw Wildlife Area. On January 9th, specialists with sonar brought in to survey the bottom of the lake discovered Jody's sunken car. On the same day, the hope of the Sanderholm family also died. Jody's naked body was found under a pile of leaves, logs, and twigs at the Kaw Wildlife Area. Authorities found DNA evidence linking Justin Thurber to both Jody's car and her body. The car had been in the lake for more than 3 days, so police feared that the water that filled the interior had destroyed all evidence. That was partly true. Forensics spent a great many hours before they found a short hair in the interior. Carrie Melton, director of the Forensic DNA Testing Lab, ran mitochondrial DNA tests on the hair found on the driver's seat of Jody Sanderholm's car and concluded that it was almost certainly Justin Thurber's hair. Barbara Leal, an employee of a private DNA testing company, tested samples taken from Jody Sanderholm's right biceps and right side of her chest. She concluded that Thurber could not have been excluded as a participant. although 99% of the population could have been excluded. Cell tower data showed that on the day Jodi disappeared, her phone and Justin Thurber's phone were in the same areas at the same time. Lori Leglider, Jodi's best friend, said she saw Thurber in the college parking lot the day she disappeared. When the police looked at the camera footage provided by the college administration, they were convinced that Lori was telling the truth. Thurber was in the college parking lot at the same time rehearsal was going on, and he left that parking lot at the same time as Jodi. The tape showed that Thurber followed Jodi in his light blue Cadillac. Based on the fact that letters addressed to Jodi's parents were found near the lake, investigators speculated that Thurber had followed Jodi from the college to her home, and when she got out to retrieve the letters from the mailbox, he attacked her, pushed her into her own car, and drove her away. That theory was confirmed when a shoe print identical to the sole of Justin Thurber's sneakers was found next to the Sanderholm family mailbox. As previously mentioned, footprints of Thurber's shoes and smaller shoe impressions were found at the Caw Wildlife Area. It was determined that these were the footprints of Jodi's shoes found at the fishing lake along with her other belongings. Thurber's footprints and Jodi's footprints in the preserve were located side by side. Walking along them, at one point the searchers saw that Jodi's footprints were interrupted and Justin's footprints went deep into the woods. This meant that he was carrying the girl further on his own. His shoe prints were also found where the body had been found. All three of the people Justin said he had been with the day of Jodi's disappearance denied what he said. They had not seen Thurber that day, which meant his story about the car being stuck near Cedar Vale was a fabrication. The three officers drove Thurber to Cedar Vale so he could show them where he said he was. Thurber was unable to determine where he said the car was stuck. Back at the police station, Thurber volunteered to take a polygraph test. He also requested that his relative Chad Monroe, who worked for the Cowley County Sheriff's Office, be present during the questioning. The evidence found was sufficient to indict Justin Thurber. He himself denied guilt, and the judge set his bail at $1 million. Thurber's attorneys tried to convince the court that he was mentally retarded and incompetent, but were unable to do so. Thurber had graduated from high school and even attended college for some time, so the judge found the defense claim of his mental retardation unproven. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy testified at the trial. He said that the first time he looked at the body, he had no doubt that the last hours of Jodi's life were very painful. Her entire body and face were covered with bruises and abrasions. There were clear signs of strangulation on her neck. It was strangulation that was named as the cause of death of Jodi Sanderholm. I can't say all the information about what the medical examiner found during the autopsy. Not all horror movie maniacs are as brutal as Thurber was to Jodi. Without going into detail, and at the same time to give you some idea of what happened at the Caw Wildlife Area, I will say the following. The crime was motivated by carnal desire, and Thurber committed the crime with a stick. At trial, in addition to Thurber's ex-girlfriend, 6 other women testified, each claiming that the defendant stalked her. One of them was a co-worker of his. In one case, she even had to call the police to have an officer walk her to her car after work. It was already dark, and she was afraid to go to the parking lot because she saw Justin waiting for her. Earlier, he had left a rose and a note under the windshield wiper of her car, saying he liked her and wanted to get to know her better. Several witnesses said they saw Jodi Sanderholm's car on January 5, 2007. Kari Morris, a friend of Jodi's, noticed that Jodi was sitting in the passenger seat as their cars passed each other in Arkansas City shortly after noon. Morris reported that the man behind the wheel of Jodi's car appeared to be a large man. She called Jodi's cell phone, but received no answer. 2 other women reported seeing a vehicle that looked like Jodi Sanderholm's car while driving on a dirt road south of Arkansas City around 3 p.m. One of them said the driver was Thurber and identified him in court. On February 17, 2009, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, finding Thurber guilty on all counts and recommending that he be sentenced to death. Realizing what sentence the judge would hand down, Thurber tried to negotiate a plea bargain. His lawyer told the prosecutor that Justin would plead guilty if he were not given the capital punishment. Jody's family opposed such a deal. The presiding judge took the jury's decision into consideration and sentenced Thurber to death by lethal injection in March 2009. In 2008, the state of Kansas signed the Jody Act, which, among other things, expands police authority over stalking suspects and expands the list of actions that can be considered stalking. Since the sentencing, Justin Thurber has not abandoned his attempts to appeal the court's decision. His attorneys are trying to prove that Thurber is mentally retarded. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court postponed Thurber's death sentence, citing a Supreme Court of the United States ruling that the execution of defendants, even those with mild developmental disabilities, is unconstitutional. The Sanderholm family said a competency hearing was held during the original trial, and Thurber was found to be fully competent at the time. Jody's mother, Cindy Sanderholm, sat in the courtroom 11 years after her daughter's passing. She said that Thurber had written letters to other girls while in prison, and this should show that he was competent. "That's sick. It's just sick," Cindy said. "It tells you that he is competent enough to reach out to people and write letters. He knows what he is doing. I'm sure Jody, pleaded for her life, and he didn't give it to her. She didn't get a second choice. She didn't get a second chance," she added. In August 2021, the Kansas Supreme Court issued an opinion announcing that a state law passed in 2020 allows Thurber, who is appealing a death sentence, to seek appointment by the Cowley County District Court of an attorney to assist in post-conviction DNA testing. Thus, even 16 years after Jody Sanderholm's passing, the final word in this case has yet to be spoken. It should also be noted that no one has been executed since Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994. The last time anyone was executed in Kansas was in 1965. Since then, besides Thurber, 9 other people have been sentenced to death, but no sentence has been carried out. "We haven't executed anyone in that time frame, and there's no timetable to have any other future executions," said Adam Pfannenstiel, the communications spokesperson for Kansas Department of Corrections. "I think it's a little shocking that Kansas reinstated the death penalty over 20 years ago, and there's not a plan yet," said Jennifer Aldridge, Jody's older sister. "I thought this would have been something that would have been discussed 20 years ago when it was reinstated. Therefore, even if Thurber's death sentence is upheld, there is a good chance that it will never be carried out." 39-year-old Justin Thurber remains at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. According to a Kansas Legislative Post Audit Committee report published in 2014, each of the inmates serving time in administrative segregation at El Dorado comes with an annual cost of nearly $49,000. Further, it is not only the cost to house an inmate sentenced to death. Taxpayers also pay nearly 4 times the price to prosecute a case where the death penalty, if pursued by the prosecution, $395,000 per case, compared to only $100,000 per case when the death penalty is not sought. For the Sanderholms, taxes are added insult to an unbearable injury and a grueling wait for justice in the case of their daughter, Jody. "It hurts me so bad every week when I see my paycheck, and I know I'm paying tax money to feed him," said Brian Sanderholm. "Death is what he deserves, and that's what the law stated," said Cindy Sanderholm. "So, we need to get the law fixed so we can use it. If it was your daughter, your son, it was our daughter, what would you want to have happen?" asked Brian Sanderholm. Most regrettably, Cynthia Ann Sanderholm, Jody's mother, passed away on December 2, 2022, at the age of 63.